I reached mile marker 77 just after midnight. The road sign was bent and rusted, like it had been hit more than once and never fixed. The name Redstone was still there, though someone had taken the time to repaint the letters white, even if the rest of the sign was falling apart. That should have been my first warning. I pulled my car onto the gravel shoulder and turned off the engine. The silence came down hard, like a lid being closed. No wind, no insects, not even the soft ticking sound engines usually make when they cool. It felt wrong, like the night was holding its breath. I'm a field reporter for a late-night public radio segment. My job is to document places most people don't go anymore. Abandoned towns, closed roads, forgotten jobs. Redstone had been flagged in our system because it didn't make sense. On paper, it was abandoned, legally cleared, no residents, no services. But in the same file, under operational status, someone had typed, mining activity unresolved. No end date, no closure report, just unresolved. That's why I was there. I grabbed my recorder, my notebook, and a flashlight. The air smelled like metal and old dust, the kind of smell that sits in your nose and doesn't leave. When I crossed the edge of town, my phone lost signal. Not unusual. What bothered me was that the time stopped updating too. It stayed fixed at 12:04 a.m. Redstone was built in a shallow bowl between low hills. The mine entrance was cut straight into the rock at the far end of town, a dark mouth framed by warning signs bleached pale by sun and age. The main street ran straight from the road to the mine, lined with buildings that leaned just a little too far forward, like they were tired. I clicked on my recorder. Arrival log. I said, keeping my voice calm. Redstone, mile marker 77. Local time just after midnight. Town appears intact but inactive. No visible lights. No movement. That last part was already a lie. As I walked deeper into town, I started to notice small things. A porch light with a warm yellow bulb, glowing behind a dirty cover. A curtain pulled halfway closed. Footprints in the dust that crossed the street and disappeared into an alley. I told myself there were explanations. Solar power, animals, wind, but the footprints were boot prints. Heavy ones, the kind miners wear. Most of the houses were company built. Same shape, same size, same faded red paint. Some still had numbers nailed beside the doors. Others had names carved into the wood. Families, probably, generations. People who thought they were settling somewhere permanent. I stopped outside the first house with the porch light on. The door was closed, but the wood around the frame was worn smooth, like it had been opened and shut thousands of times. I stood there longer than I meant to. The light didn't flicker. It didn't buzz. It just stayed on. I didn't knock. I moved on. The general store was next. The windows were dusty, but not broken. Inside, shelves still stood, mostly empty, but neat. A chalkboard sign near the counter read shift ends at 6. No date, no day. I felt a tightness in my chest then. A small one, like a warning my body noticed before my mind did. According to records, Redstone had been evacuated after a mine collapsed 23 years ago. No deaths confirmed, just unsafe conditions. The company pulled out. The town followed. Clean and simple. But nothing here felt like it had been left in a hurry, or at all. I walked toward the mine entrance. The ground sloped slightly upward, and the air grew colder with each step. My breath started to fog. The warning signs were still posted. Hard hats required. Authorized personnel only. One sign had been replaced recently. The bolts were new. The metal still shiny. I stopped recording. I stood there listening. That was when I heard it. A low sound. Deep, rhythmic. Not wind. Not machinery. Exactly. It sounded like something turning far underground. Slow. Patient. I turned the recorder back on with shaking fingers. There's noise coming from the mine. I said, possible equipment left running. I didn't believe that. Equipment doesn't run for 23 years without power, without maintenance, without people. I backed away from the entrance and headed toward the administrative building. If anything was still active, there might be logs, paper records, something that explained why this place didn't feel finished. The building door was unlocked. Inside, the air was warmer. Not comfortable, but lived in warm. The kind of heat that comes from bodies, not machines. My flashlight beam caught a row of time clocks mounted on the wall. Old punch-style ones, with cards still slotted inside. Most of the cards were yellow with age. The last row wasn't. I stepped closer and read the names. Dozens of them. Each card stamped with times. Ian at 6 p.m. outblank. All dated yesterday. My mouth went dry. I flipped through a logbook on the front desk. The handwriting was neat, careful. Shift assignments. Safety notes. Supply requests. The last entry was signed with initials and a date from 2 days ago. At the bottom of the page, someone had written, "Still waiting on closure confirmation." I sat down hard in the chair behind the desk. It creaked under my weight, loud in the quiet room. I realized then that I hadn't heard the mine noise in a while. Instead, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving in rhythm. Somewhere outside. I held my breath. The footsteps passed the building. One set, then another. I counted at least 6 before they faded toward the mine. No voices, no talking, just the sound of people going back to work. I stayed where I was for a long time. I don't know how long. My phone still said 12:04 a.m. When I finally stood up, I noticed a bulletin board behind the desk. Notices were pinned there. Safety reminders. Birthday announcements. One paper was newer than the rest. White. Clean. It read, "Night shift reporter on site. Do not interrupt." My name was typed underneath. I didn't remember telling anyone I was coming. I backed out of the building and returned to the street. The porch light I'd seen earlier was off now. All the lights were. The town looked darker than before, like it had closed its eyes. From the mine entrance, the low sound started again. Louder this time. Closer. I raised my recorder one last time. Ending arrival log. I said, my voice barely steady. Redstone appears operational despite abandonment status. Workers present. Activity ongoing. Town does not recognize closure. I paused, and I don't think they're done with me yet. That was when the mine whistle blew. I didn't leave Redstone after the whistle blew. I told myself it was because I needed more proof, more audio, more detail. That was my job, after all, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I didn't know which way was safe anymore. The road I came in on looked wrong. Not blocked, not damaged, just longer, like it stretched farther into the dark than it had before. The town, on the other hand, felt closer, like it had leaned in while I wasn't looking. So I stayed. I started with the houses. They lined both sides of the street, quiet and dark, their windows like empty eye sockets. I picked one at random. Number 12. The door was unlocked, same as the office building. I pushed it open with 2 fingers and listened. Nothing moved. The air inside smelled faintly of soap and old wood. Not mold, not rot. It smelled clean. That made my skin crawl more than if it had smelled ruined. I stepped inside and felt it right away. Warmth, not just in the air, in the floor. The wood beneath my boots held heat. Like someone had been standing there not long ago. I shifted my weight, lifted one foot, then the other. The warmth was uneven, like footprints that hadn't faded yet. I swallowed and raised my recorder. Inside residential structure, I whispered. Interior temperature is elevated. No visible power source. The living room was small. A couch, a table, family photos still hanging on the wall. I shined my flashlight across them. Men in work clothes, women holding babies, kids with dusty smiles. Their eyes followed the camera, frozen in moments that felt too personal to be left behind. A coffee mug sat on the table, empty but not dusty. I touched it, still warm. I pulled my hand back fast, like I'd been burned. I stood there, heart hammering, trying to explain it away. Heat retention, thick ceramic. Maybe the sun had hit the window earlier, but it was after midnight, and the windows were covered. I moved deeper into the house. The kitchen sink was dry, but the dish rack held a single plate and fork. Clean, recently. A faint smear of water still clung to the metal. I became very aware of my own breathing then. How loud it sounded. How out of place. The hallway led to 2 bedrooms. I opened the first door slowly. A child's room. Small bed. Stuffed animal on the pillow. The blanket was folded back like someone had just climbed out. I didn't step inside. I didn't want my footprints mixing with whatever was already there. The second room was larger. Adult. A pair of boots sat by the bed. Mine boots, caked with red dust. Fresh red dust. I knelt and touched the sole. Damn, that was when I felt it again. Under my knee. The floor was warm there too. I stood up fast and backed out of the room. I left that house without finishing the recording. Outside, the street looked the same. Quiet, still, but I felt watched now, not in a dramatic way. Not like eyes burning into my back. It felt more like awareness, like the town knew where I was and was politely allowing it. I crossed to the house directly across the street. Then the next, and the next. Every one of them told the same story. Beds with body-shaped dips that hadn't risen yet. Chairs pushed back slightly, as if someone had stood up in a hurry. Floors warm in long paths, like people pacing. In one house, I found a dent in the couch cushion that slowly rose back into shape while I watched. I stared at it, frozen, my mind blank. The cushion didn't snap back. It lifted slowly, carefully, like it was remembering what it was supposed to be. I whispered, "No," without meaning to. In another house, I found a bathroom mirror still fogged. My flashlight beam cut across it, and for a second I thought I saw writing. I wiped the glass with my sleeve. Nothing there, but the mirror stayed warm long after my hand left it. I stopped going inside after the 5th house. I couldn't take it anymore. Instead, I pressed my palm against the outside walls. Wood, brick, metal, warm, not sun warm, body warm, like the houses themselves were holding on to something. I tried to focus on details, professional details. I took notes. I spoke into the recorder. I described what I felt without naming it. I avoided words like impossible and haunted and wrong, but my hands were shaking the whole time. As I moved farther down the street, I noticed something else. The warmth wasn't random. It followed patterns. From front door to kitchen. From kitchen to living room. From living room to bedroom. Daily routines. Lives still being lived, just out of sight. I stopped in front of one last house. The smallest one. It sat at the edge of town, closest to the dirt road that led back toward the mine. The porch light was on again. Same soft yellow glow. I didn't want to go in. I stood there for a long time, arguing with myself. Every instinct I had said to leave, to get in my car and drive until the road ended, or I did. But another part of me felt pulled, like I owed something, like I was being rude by not knocking. So I knocked. The sound echoed louder than it should have. It traveled through the house, down the street, into the hills. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. I turned the knob and stepped inside. This house felt different right away. Heavier. The air pressed against my chest. The warmth here was stronger, thicker, like walking into a crowded room where everyone went silent at once. The living room floor was hot, not painfully so, but enough that I noticed through my boots. I followed the warmth toward the kitchen. That's where I saw the table. 6 chairs, all pulled out, all facing inward, as if a meeting had just ended. I leaned on the counter to steady myself, and that's when I felt it. A deep vibration through the floor. A low hum. The same sound I'd heard near the mine. I realized then that it wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from the houses, from the walls, the floors, the spaces where people had stood and sat and slept for years. The town wasn't empty. It was full of routines that never learned how to stop. I backed toward the door, keeping my eyes on the room. The warmth followed me, not physically, just attentively. Before I left, I noticed something scratched into the wood near the doorframe. Small letters. Careful, we're still home. Outside, the porch light clicked off the moment I stepped away. I walked back into the street, numb, my thoughts slow and heavy. I raised the recorder again, though my voice sounded far away to my own ears. All residential structures show signs of recent use. I said. Heat signatures consistent with human presence. No occupants observed. I paused. Correction, I added. Occupants observed indirectly. Town appears occupied without visibility. Somewhere behind me, a floorboard creaked. Not in the houses. In the street. I didn't turn around. I walked faster toward the mine, because somehow that felt like the only honest direction left. By the time I reached my car, my legs felt weak, like they had forgotten how walking was supposed to work. The street behind me stayed quiet. No footsteps followed. No doors opened. Still, I didn't turn my back on the houses until I was sitting in the driver's seat with the door locked. The engine started on the first try. That almost made me cry. I didn't drive away. Instead, I sat there with both hands on the wheel, breathing slow, trying to think like a reporter again. I told myself fear was information. That panic meant there was something important here, something worth documenting. That lie tasted familiar. I reached into the back seat and pulled out my radio kit. It was old but reliable, short-wave long range with a handheld mic and a small antenna I could mount on the car roof. I brought it in case cell service dropped. I hadn't expected it to be my only voice left. I stepped back outside to set it up. The night felt thicker now. The dark pressed closer, like the space between things had shrunk. The mine entrance sat at the end of the road, barely visible, but I could feel it humming through the ground. Once the antenna was up, I climbed back into the car and powered on the unit. Static filled the cabin. I adjusted the dial, scanning through channels. Emergency bands, weather, old company frequencies listed in my notes. Most were dead, just white noise and saw crackling. Then, without warning, the static cleared. A voice came through. "You copy that?" I froze. The voice was male. Calm, tired, not distorted, not echoing. It sounded like someone sitting in the passenger seat with a walkie-talkie. I swallowed and pressed the transmit button. "This is a civilian field reporter," I said. "Identify yourself." There was a pause. Not a dead pause. A listening one. "Yeah, we got you." The voice said, "You're coming in late tonight." My mouth went dry. "I'm not scheduled." I replied, "This channel should be inactive." A soft chuckle crackled through the speaker. "Nothing ever goes inactive here," the voice said. "Just delayed." I scribbled notes with shaking hands. Ask questions. Standard ones. Name. Role. Date. Name's Walker. The voice said. Drill operator. Night shift. "What year is it?" I asked. Another pause. "Don't start that," Walker said. "We got work to do." A second voice cut in. Female. Younger. "Tell him the lift's acting up again," she said. It stalled near the lower scene. They were talking to each other, using my radio. I listened as they spoke back and forth, using terms I didn't understand but wrote down anyway. Depth measurements, pressure changes, a section they called the red pocket. I checked my notes. The red pocket had been sealed off before the collapse. It was listed as unstable, unsafe, abandoned. "Walker," I said, my voice barely steady. "How many of you are down there?" There was a long pause this time. The static crept back and around the edges. "All of us," he said finally. I felt cold then, not the slow chill from before. This was sudden, sharp. "How many is that?" I asked. The channel went quiet. Then the woman's voice returned, softer now. "We don't count anymore," she said. The radio hissed, then clicked. Another voice joined. Older, rough. "Who's that outsider?" he asked. He cleared. "No," Walker said. "But he's standing where the supervisor used to stand." I looked out the windshield toward the mine. The entrance light flickered on. I hadn't noticed it before. A single bulb, glowing weakly above the warning signs. The hum grew louder, like something deep inside the mountain was shifting. "I shouldn't be hearing this," I said into the mic. "According to records, this mine closed over 20 years ago." Laughter broke across the channel. Not mocking, not cruel, just tired. "Yeah," someone said. "That's what they told us too." More voices joined in. Men and women, different ages. All calm, all focused. They talked about tasks. about shifts blending together, about never seeing daylight anymore, but still feeling the hours pass. I realized something then. None of them sounded scared. They sounded resigned. Why are you still working? I asked. Another pause. Then Walker answered. Because the work never finished, he said. They sealed the entrance, but they didn't seal the job. The woman spoke again. We kept waiting for the end of shift whistle, she said. It never came, so we just kept going. I thought about the time cards. All punched in, none punched out. My hand started to shake, so badly I had to set the mic down. A new sound came through the radio. Not a voice, a deep grinding noise. Metal against rock. Closer now. Too close. Hey, Walker said. You feel that? Yes. I whispered, though I wasn't sure he could hear me. That means it's moving again, he said. You should probably step back. Step back from what? I asked. No answer. The hum beneath the town swelled. The houses behind me creaked, like old ships adjusting to rough water. I felt the vibration through the car seat, through my bones. Then the radio clicked again. You're not supposed to be on this channel, a new voice said. It was different from the others. Clearer, firmer, authoritative. Who is this? I asked. Supervisor Hale, the voice said, and you're interfering with an active operation. My heart sank. I'm a reporter, I said. This town is listed as abandoned. A sigh came through the speaker. We filed the closure request. Hale said, head office never approved it, so the shift stays open. That's not how it works, I said, though even as I spoke, I knew how weak that sounded. It is here, he replied. Redstone runs on continuity, not permission. I watched the mine entrance as shadow moved inside it, not figures, just depth, like the dark was rearranging itself. What do you want from me? I asked. Another pause. Then Hale spoke slowly. You logged your arrival, he said. You observed the town. You listened to the workers. Yes, that makes you part of the report, he said. And reports don't leave until the shift ends. When does it end? I asked. The channel filled with breathing, dozens of breaths, in and out, steady, patient. Then Walker spoke one last time. When the work's done, he said, or when someone replaces us. The radio went dead. No static, no hiss, just silence. I sat there for a long time, staring at the dark mouth of the mine. My recorder was still running. The red light blinked softly, like a heartbeat. I turned it off. Some things don't need proof. As I opened the car door, the mine whistle blew again. Closer this time, louder, and I knew, with a cold certainty settling deep in my chest, that the channel wasn't closed at all. It was waiting. I never left Redstone that night. Not really. I thought I had. Of course. I drove toward the highway at first light, thinking the morning sun would bring clarity. I imagined filing a report, telling everyone that the town was abandoned, but strange. Warm floors, footprints without bodies, voices on channels that should have been silent, that sort of thing. Something they'd maybe laugh at, then archive as a curiosity. But the closer I got to the edge of town, the heavier the air became, like walking through water. My car felt sluggish in the wrong way, like the tires were sinking into the asphalt itself. I stopped, not because of the car. I stopped because I realized I couldn't leave. The road that had been there when I arrived now twisted subtly. Curves I didn't remember. Mile marker 77, when I passed it again, didn't match the marker I'd seen earlier. Same number, yes, but the sign leaned a little differently. The paint slightly brighter. It hadn't aged. The road was the same road, but somehow different. I parked in the middle of town, in front of the office building, staring at the windows as the first gray light touched the rooftops. My hands were shaking too much to hold the recorder steady, but I clicked it on anyway. I had to leave something behind. Evidence, if nothing else, that I had been here. Final report, I whispered into microphone. Redstone remains active. Conditions do not match historical records. Population appears unverified. Presence confirmed through indirect observation and radio communication. Local environment exhibits temporal anomalies. I stopped. The word sounded hollow even to me. Temporal anomalies. Population unverified. Carefully neutral phrasing for something that didn't make sense. Something that had no precedent. I remember the houses. Warm floors. Footprints in dust. Chairs pushed back. Beds with depressions that hadn't risen. And that small note scratched into a doorframe in a house at the edge of town. We're still home. I tried to laugh at myself for feeling like I had trespassed into something alive. But the laugh caught in my throat. The truth was worse than alive. The town wasn't just occupied. The town itself was aware, attentive, patient, waiting. I tried to reason with it. Maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe the mind, the houses, the streets, the warm floors, the voices, they're just echoes, patterns my brain is filling in. I wanted that to be true. I clutched the steering wheel and told myself over and over that it was just a story, a job, a task. Nothing more. Then the mind whistle blew, not as a warning, not as a signal, not as a sound that should exist outside my memory of it. It wasn't even the same whistle I'd heard before. Lower, longer, pressed into my chest. The vibration traveled through the car and into my bones. And suddenly I understood. It wasn't waiting for anyone to arrive. It was waiting for something to leave. I tried the radio again. Nothing. Static. Then Walker's voice. Clear, calm. Like he'd never stopped talking. Still with us? Yes, I croaked. My throat was dry. I'm trying to leave. You're not allowed, Walker said, simple and matter of fact. No anger, no threat, just a statement of fact. I laughed nervously. Not allowed? I can drive away. A pause. Then the woman's voice, soft. It doesn't work like that. I frowned. What doesn't work? The town, she said. Redstone doesn't accept departures. Not unless... Her voice trailed off. Unless what? I asked. My hands gripped the mic, so tight it ached. Unless you're replaced, she said. The words sank in slowly, like ice water filling a bucket. My heartbeat accelerated, then slowed, then accelerated again. Replaced. I remembered Hale. Supervisor Hale. His voice authoritative, unyielding. You're interfering with an active operation. That's when it clicked. The mind, the town, the streets, the houses. They weren't just occupied by echoes of people. They were on shift. The town was alive in the way that operations are alive. Continuous. Unending. Procedural. Timeless. I backed the car into the street slowly, hoping that movement might signal permission to leave. The pavement rippled under the tires, subtle, like the town was breathing beneath me. A floorboard creaked somewhere behind me. Not a house. Not a porch. Somewhere else. The street. I drove forward slowly, toward the main road, toward the exit I thought I knew. Mile marker 77 came again, bent and rusted, but slightly different. No signal on the phone. My clock stopped again, frozen at 6:14 a.m., though the sky had brightened. I drove on, faster now, desperation in my chest. But the road never ended. It curved back toward the town, always back toward the center, always past the same houses, the same signs, the same warm floors. I parked in front of the office building again. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. I reached for my notebook, flipping through pages full of observations, but the ink seemed to smear slightly, as if the town itself didn't like permanence. I tried to write something new. I need to leave. The letters wobbled on the page, almost illegible. I remembered the radio. I clicked it back on. Static. Then Walker. You're learning, he said. That's good. What do you mean? I asked. My voice sounded small, almost childish. You see now, Walker said. The shift doesn't end until it ends for all of us. And that includes you. I closed my eyes. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. This can't be happening. I repeated it like a mantra. But when I opened them, the sun had moved backward slightly. Shadows stretched wrong across the street. The office building windows reflected the interior lights I hadn't turned on. My car seemed farther from the road than when I left it. I realized then that I had become part of the shift. part of the operation, part of Redstone itself. I tried to argue, but my mind faltered. Language faltered. Everything I thought I knew about leaving, about time, about space, it failed me. I spoke into the radio again. I'm documenting. I'm reporting. That's all. Yes, Walker said. Now you understand. I sank into the driver's seat, shaking, my heart a slow, drumming pulse. My recorder was still on. It had captured every word. My notebook had captured the observations. But what would anyone do with them? No signal, no acknowledgement, no way to send them out. And now, I wasn't even sure anyone would recognize me as separate from the town anymore. I thought about the houses. Warm floors, footprints that didn't fade, beds that held the shape of bodies long gone, chairs pulled back as if someone had just stood. It wasn't ghosts. It wasn't imagination. It was routine. The town itself was maintaining life, maintaining operation, maintaining observation. I glanced at the mine entrance. Shadows shifted inside, slower now, more deliberate. The hum beneath the town became a low vibration in my chest, my stomach, my skull. I understood, finally, that leaving wasn't permission. Leaving wasn't allowed. Departure wasn't a concept recognized here. I whispered into the recorder one final time, my voice a trembling thread. Redstone remains active. The town appears operational. Observers are present. Departure denied. Status unknown. A long pause. Then, through the static, Walker's voice, calm and unwavering. "Welcome to the shift," he said. And in that moment, I realized that the town had already accepted me, that I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. The streets, the houses, the mine, the air itself, they were all alive in a way that refused end. I was not a visitor, not a reporter, not even an observer anymore. I was part of the operation. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe, tried to tell myself I was imagining it. But the warmth of the floors, the rhythm of the hum, the voices through the radio, they were real. I had become a permanent entry in Redstone's log. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that status would remain unknown. Forever. I got the call at 3 in the afternoon. The kind of call that makes you pause, check the number twice, and wonder if it's a prank. Red Hollow. The voice said, "Clipped and official. We need you on site. Night shift. Monitoring only. No trains, no people. Just watch the town." I laughed into the receiver. "A ghost town?" "Yes," they said. "We're paying double." The pay was good, and the curiosity was worse. By 6 that evening, I was driving out of the city on the highway that faded into dirt, headlights cutting through the early evening mist. Red Hollow wasn't on most maps, not the modern ones. Anyway, satellite images showed nothing but a few twisted rails and the occasional building. According to the files, the last train had rolled through 40 years ago. The station had been abandoned not long after. I thought I'd seen abandoned towns before. Empty warehouses, forgotten factories, towns that had slowly died as the economy moved elsewhere. But Red Hollow felt different the moment I crested the hill. The town was small, maybe a dozen buildings at most. The main street ran straight from the overgrown station toward the hills in the distance. The rails had rusted red, edges curling like old paper, wooden ties cracked and warped, grass sprouting between them. And yet, the station itself looked maintained. The paint was peeling in the corners, yes, but the windows were intact, the doors closed, and the platform looked swept. Not recently, perhaps, but with intent. I parked my truck in front of the old station and stepped out. The air was cold, early October chill, but the silence was colder. No wind, no animals, not even the faint hum of electricity. Nothing moved. I lifted the flashlight from my bag, and the beam cut across the station. The main office inside looked untouched. Desks still lined up, chairs pushed in, and a logbook on the counter. I shivered despite myself. I clicked the recorder on. Red Hollow, night shift monitoring. Time, 6:42 p.m. Town appears abandoned. Station intact. No visible human activity. Rail lines inactive. Standing by for further observation. I had no instructions beyond that. No cameras, no sensors, just me and a notebook. My job was to sit, watch, record, wait, which, of course, made my mind race. I walked along the platform, scanning each rail line, each building. Nothing, just the occasional piece of debris. Rusted tools, broken chairs, an old luggage cart tipped on its side. I made a note of it, kept my voice low and my flashlight steady. The further I walked, the more I felt eyes on me. Not physical eyes, just the awareness of being observed. I chalked it up to nerves. Night, isolation, a job that didn't require thought, just presence. But every time I turned a corner, I felt a subtle shift in the shadows, like the darkness was moving to avoid being illuminated. I returned to the station office. The logbook was still there. I opened it to a random page. The entries stopped decades ago. Names, times, notes about shipments that never came, equipment maintenance logs, oddly precise handwriting. I set my flashlight on the counter and took a deep breath. I was supposed to be watching nothing, but watching nothing was impossible. You can't stare at empty rails without imagining the trains rolling through, engines thundering, wheels on tracks, whistles in the distance. You can't sit alone in a room that hasn't been entered for 40 years without hearing steps that aren't there. I sat in the chair behind the counter, notebook in hand, and tried to make sense of it. My own breathing sounded loud, intrusive, the quiet of the town pressed against it, highlighting every small sound. My pen scraped across paper in long, slow strokes, noting empty platforms, intact structures, overgrown rails, and shadows that seemed to linger a second too long. Hours passed, not in a linear way. Time stretched thin. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a wash of violet in the sky, and darkness settled over Red Hollow like a heavy blanket. The flashlight cut a cone through it, but the edges dissolved into absolute black. At some point, I noticed a feeling again, that sensation that I wasn't alone. I hadn't seen anyone, hadn't heard voices, hadn't even glimpsed movement beyond the occasional sway of a loose sign, and yet awareness. Something in the buildings, the rails, even the air seemed to know I was there. It was patient, like it had been waiting for someone to come back. I tried to speak, to break the tension. Okay, I said to myself, just a night, watch the town, make notes. Nothing happens. Nothing exists. You're getting paid. That's it. But the second I said it, I felt the weight shift, the silence press harder. I realized then that this town didn't respond to thought or intention. It just waited, patient, immovable, eternal. I walked the tracks again. The farther I went, the stranger the air felt. There was no wind. Yet the rustling of grass between the rails sounded like footsteps. Not close, not fast, but deliberate, measuring. And I could have sworn I felt vibrations under my boots. Faint at first, then steady, rhythmic, like the slow approach of a train that no longer existed. I stopped and bent down, pressing my ear to the rail. Nothing, only cold metal, only the silence that stretched for miles. I returned to the station and checked the logbook again. Names I recognized from old records, not living names, names of workers long gone. And yet, the pages seemed fresher, lines not faded, ink not aged, dates yesterday. I laughed nervously. No, I whispered. No, that can't be. Not possible. I flipped through more pages. They were blank, except for small notes in handwriting that wasn't mine. Shift continues. Observation confirmed. I looked around the office. Empty desks, empty chairs, empty station. My flashlight trembled in my hands. I realized I hadn't noticed the faint hum before. Low, constant, beneath the floorboards, the rails, maybe even the buildings themselves. I tried the radio I had in my bag. Static, a simple test. No one to answer. Nothing. Just white noise. Then a whisper. So soft I thought I imagined it. Observer confirmed. I froze. Shift continues. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. My heart thumped painfully in my chest. I spoke into the radio, even though I didn't expect an answer. Who's there? Nothing. Only the hum. I walked outside, flashlight sweeping. The platform, the rails, the small houses that lined the edge of town. All empty, no movement, no lights, No indication that anyone or anything was present. And yet, the feeling persisted. Presence. Watching. Waiting. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a caretaker. Maybe someone lived nearby, keeping the place from falling apart. Maybe the hum was wind through the metal. Maybe the whispers were the way sound travels in empty buildings at night. All rationalizations. But the unease in my chest refused to relent. I returned to the office, sat at the counter, and wrote a final note in my notebook. Assigned to watch nothing. Nothing is being watched. Nothing happens. Time stretches. Presence acknowledged. Observation continues. I glance at the station clock. Broken. Hands frozen at 11:37 p.m. I didn't care. Time was meaningless here. Watching was endless. Shift started. Shift never ended. And now I was part of it. I turned the recorder back on. Red Hollow. Night shift continues. Assigned task. Observation of non-existent activity. Presence confirmed despite absence of personnel or trains. The shift persists. Observer remains. Status unknown. I leaned back in the chair, chest tight, realizing I had been sitting there for hours, yet the sun had never truly set or risen. I had been assigned to watch nothing, but nothing was watching me, and maybe, I thought grimly, that was worse. I looked out the window, down the darkened rails stretching into the hills. Nothing moved, and yet every shadow felt like it had weight, like it could bend if I reached for it. The platform, the buildings, even the air felt alive, not in conventional sense, but in the way a mechanism runs indefinitely, without acknowledgement, without completion. I sat there through the long hours, waiting, recording, writing, listening, and I realized that the real job wasn't monitoring an abandoned town. It was learning to exist inside it, to endure its attention, to survive when everything around you has forgotten endings. The night stretched on. I stayed at my post, watching, listening, waiting, and understanding with a sinking certainty that I was no longer just assigned to watch nothing. I was part of the shift itself. The town wasn't empty. It wasn't abandoned. It was alive in ways I had never known, and it would never let me go. I learned very quickly that in Red Hollow, schedules were everything, not schedules for trains. They stopped coming decades ago, but schedules for events that refuse logic. And the most important schedule of all, 3:17 a.m. I noticed that the first night I stayed in the station office. The town was silent, save for the low hum that seemed to come from the rails themselves. My flashlight cast narrow beams through the darkness, bouncing off broken benches and rusting tools. I'd been recording, taking notes, doing everything a professional observer could do. But my attention kept straying toward the tracks. It was instinct. Something about the rails called to me. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the air shifted. Not suddenly, not like a gust of wind, but more subtly, like the world paused for a breath. I didn't hear it first. Nothing sounded different. No engine, no whistle, no vibration. Just the cold, still air pressing against my skin. But then I realized I was holding my own breath, and so was the town. The first night, I saw with the corner of my eye, a shadow moving along the rails, precise, straight, and deliberate. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to acknowledge it, because the moment you gave it attention, it changed. That's when I understood that this arrival wasn't bound by normal rules. I tried to describe it in my notebook. Something travels the tracks. Silent, dark, not a train, not a person. Observed by something. But words failed me. How do you record a presence that refuses shape? How do you log an event without sensory input? I tried anyway. The next night, I prepared. I set my recorder on the counter, made detailed sketches of the tracks outside, timed my flashlight sweeps. 3:17 approached, and I felt the shift in the air long before it happened. The hum beneath the rails rose slightly, imperceptibly at first, then steady, like a heartbeat echoing through the ground. I glanced down the track from the station platform. The rails looked normal, corroded, old, abandoned, but the space between them, just beyond the distance my eyes could focus, seemed to warp. As the second hand on my watch edged closer to 17 minutes past 3, the air over the rails darkened not in shadow but in density. It was a black that seemed to absorb light, not just a beam from my flashlight, but all peripheral vision. I could feel the darkness pressing. And then I saw them. Not a train, not a vehicle, not a machine. Just movement along the tracks. Like something invisible had weight. Like the air itself was riding the rails. My chest tightened. I wanted to look away. I wanted to close my eyes. But I couldn't. From behind me came the faint sound of chairs creaking. I froze. The town was awake. Not alive in a normal way, but awake and aware, watching the arrival with me. Windows reflected the darkened air over the rails. The platform seemed to lean slightly toward the tracks, as if curious. The first time, I thought I imagined it. The second time, I didn't. The third time, I knew. Every night at 3:17, the same event occurred. The tracks were visited. Something arrived. Without light, without sound, but always present. I started to take notes obsessively. Dates, times, observations, descriptions as abstract as they needed to be. The rails bend slightly. The air distorts. Shadows deepen. Not a train, not a person. Something moves. And the town responded. Houses settled. Floors shifted. Shadows deepen around windows. Porches lean closer, like spectators in a theater. Silent, patient, eternal. I tried to capture on camera, but the device refused. Lens covered in static that shouldn't exist. Batteries drained in minutes. Memory cards corrupted. Even audio failed. The recorder picked up nothing. Though my notebook filled with frantic scribbles of what I saw, one night braver, or perhaps more foolish. I stepped onto the rails just before 3:17. I wanted to feel it, to know its size, its weight, its presence. The moment my boots touched the iron, the hairs on my neck rose. The world went unnaturally still. My breath froze halfway out. Then, slowly, impossibly, the rails themselves seemed to draw towards something at the horizon. Not a physical pull, a tug on the senses, like gravity bent for observation alone. I heard whispers then, soft, multi-layered, not human, but shaped like speech. One voice distinct, low, patient, observer present. Shift continues. I spun around. Nothing. Only the platform. Only the empty buildings. Only the cold wind brushing against my jacket. I understood that I wasn't meant to touch the arrival. I was meant to witness it. And that witnessing was enough to tie me to Red Hollow. Another night. I tried recording commentary while standing on the platform. Observation, I said, scheduled daily. Event occurs 3:17 a.m. arrival presence, undefined. Travels the rails. Town responds. Observer acknowledged. My own words sounded absurd even to me, but I spoke anyway, hoping repetition would help my mind process the impossible. The arrival moved silently past the horizon, invisible, uncatchable. And yet, I felt in every nerve, in my legs, my chest, my fingers, a presence so immense it had no mass, so old it had no origin, so patient it didn't care about time. The hum beneath the rails rose and fell in response. The town leaned in. Shadows deepened. Floorboards shifted. Porches sagged slightly. Windows glimmered. All attention focused on the tracks. All attention focused on me. Some nights, I saw glimpses of shapes in the distance. Angles that weren't right. Flashes of movement just at the edge of vision. But whenever I focused, they dissolved. Not into shadow, but into the nothing of the rails themselves. A presence that existed only when unobserved directly. I stopped trying to predict what would happen next. The arrival had no rules beyond its schedule. It didn't repeat, it didn't accelerate, it didn't announce itself. It just was. And every time, I was reminded of the impossibility of leaving. Red Hollow didn't exist for convenience. It existed to endure. And enduring meant observing. After nights of this, I began recording everything I could. Not cameras, not audio. Notes, sketches, observations. Temperature changes, shadows, faint vibrations, floorboard creaks, the subtle shifting of dust on the platform. All the little things that made the air seem alive. All the little things that reminded me that the town itself was participating in the event, as much a part of it as whatever passed along the rails. One morning, I wasn't sure which, I realized I had been in Red Hollow longer than a normal shift. Time warped in subtle ways. A night could stretch endlessly. A morning could arrive and leave without me noticing. My watch stopped working. My phone had no signal. My own reflection in the station office window looked older, more tired, and still, the 3:17 arrival came. I learned to anticipate it not by looking at a clock, but by feeling the air shift, by sensing the hum under the rails, by noticing the town waking subtly around me. Shadows deepened, houses leaned, windows glimmered, and then, exactly at the right moment, the arrival passed. Every time, I whispered into my recorder, 3:17 a.m. arrival confirmed, observer present, town responding, event complete. I no longer tried to approach. I no longer tried to name it. I no longer tried to record it. I only observed, because that was all Red Hollow allowed, all it had ever allowed. And as the nights went on, I realized that my assignment, my job, wasn't to monitor nothing. It was to watch, to witness, to endure, to be counted. The 3:17 arrival was more than an event. It was a reminder. Red Hollow was alive in ways I couldn't name. And every night, it reminded me gently, insistently, that watching was not optional. I had been hired to watch nothing. But the nothing had a schedule, and I would never miss it. The radio crackled just after midnight. The sound was harsh, urgent. Carried over the storm pounding the pavement. Rain so heavy it sounded like stones hitting my cruiser roof. Lightning split the sky every few minutes, turning the dark highway into a field of blinding white. I gripped the wheel tighter and flicked on the wipers. They were moving too slow to keep up. The rain wasn't rain anymore. It was a curtain washing out everything beyond a few dozen feet. Dispatch's voice cut through the static. Unit 43. We got a stalled vehicle reported on Highway 37, mile marker 22. Caller says it's just standing there. No lights, no movement. Proceed with caution. I repeated the coordinates to myself. Highway 37. That stretch was notorious in bad weather. Few streetlights. Curves that disappeared into the darkness. Potholes deep enough to break axles. I turned up the heater a notch. Even though the windows fogged instantly, the windshield reflected my own worried eyes back at me. As I drove, I thought about how many calls I'd taken like this. Stalled cars, stranded drivers, sometimes a deer on the road, sometimes nothing at all. But something about the way the dispatcher's voice hesitated just before giving the location made me tense. Like they weren't sure if it was a real call. By the time I reached mile marker 22, the rain had stopped in spurts, only to return with renewed intensity. My headlights cut swaths through the night, shining over wet asphalt that glimmered like glass. And then I saw him, a man, standing in the middle of the road, not waving his arms, not moving, just standing. I hit the brakes instinctively, tires skidding slightly on the wet pavement. My heart started hammering. I lowered the window a crack to listen over the storm. Silence, not a word, not even the sound of clothing moving against the wind. I radioed in, dispatch, I have a visual. One male, middle of the highway, no movement. Static, then copy that Unit 43. Approach carefully. I eased the cruiser closer, keeping a safe distance. The man didn't flinch, didn't wave, didn't even breathe, or at least I couldn't see it. His figure was oddly distinct against the rain. Dark coat, wide-brimmed hat, though my headlights barely illuminated features. Something about his posture unnerved me. Too straight, too deliberate. I slowed to a crawl, sliding the door lock back to open it quickly if needed. Rain soaked my jacket as I stepped onto the asphalt. The storm's wind whipped my flashlight beam across the man. He stood perfectly still, watching, or maybe just existing. My stomach twisted with unease. Sir, my voice sounded small, even to me, swallowed by the storm. Do you need assistance? No response, not even a shift in stance. I took another step, the water rushing around my boots. The man didn't blink, didn't breathe, and yet he felt wrong. Not alive in the normal sense. like a shadow pretending to be a person. I radioed again. Dispatch, he's not responding. No vehicle around him. He's just standing there. Static, then a voice, calm but nervous. Unit 43, maintain distance. Don't approach if he doesn't respond. I nodded to myself, though they couldn't see. I didn't move closer. I raised my flashlight higher, trying to illuminate a face. And then the rain paused, just for a moment. The wind cut. The storm held its breath. For that heartbeat, I could see his face. Pale, sharp features, eyes dark in the night, almost hollow. Lips pressed tight, expressionless. And just before the storm roared back, he tilted his head slightly, as if acknowledging me without moving his body. I stumbled back, heart thundering. I pressed my back against the cruiser, gripping the radio. Dispatch, he moved his head. Unit 43, static. Remain calm. Maintain visual. Don't engage. Engage. The words sounded ridiculous in my own head. What was I supposed to do with a man standing in the highway during a storm? But the unease clutched my chest like a fist. Something about it made the rain heavier, the darkness thicker. My flashlight didn't feel bright enough. My own presence felt inadequate. Lightning struck again, and I noticed the shadows around him. Not natural shadows. They stretched wrong, bending toward him, elongating into shapes that didn't belong on a straight road. I wanted to blink, wanted to turn away, but instinct held me, locked me in place. He didn't move, not a step, not a flicker, and yet I felt the air shift around him, like he was drawing the storm into himself, absorbing the wet, the wind, the light, until the world felt thinner. I radioed again, voice shaking. Dispatch, I don't know what this is. He's not normal. Static, then slowly. Unit 43, advise you to withdraw to your vehicle. Keep distance. Do not turn your back. I obeyed, backing toward the cruiser. I kept my eyes on him. The storm came back full force as soon as I climbed inside. Rain slashed across the windshield. My hands trembled as I locked the doors. And then, impossibly, he vanished. Not ran, not walked, not faded. Just gone. No footprints. No trace. Nothing but the wet asphalt and the storm's roar. I sat there for a long time, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind had warped from fatigue, from storm, from the isolation patrolling the highway at night. But the way the radio had gone dead for a moment, the way the shadows had warped, the way the air had thickened around him, it didn't make sense. By the time the storm eased, I was shaken, but I had a duty. I drove slowly down Highway 37, scanning every curve, every puddle, every shadow. Nothing, just empty asphalt and the occasional glow of distant signs. I checked the mile markers. Still at 22, still the same place. But the feeling lingered, the sense that I was being watched, even with the storm gone, even with the man gone. I called in the final report before the shift ended. Unit 43, visual lost. Highway clear. No vehicle or person present. Storm subsiding. Area secure. The dispatcher's voice was neutral, professional. Copy, Unit 43. Return to station when safe. I drove back slowly, glancing in the rearview mirror. Empty road. Moonlight reflecting off wet asphalt. Nothing. And yet, I felt him in the back of my mind. Standing there, always waiting. The storm hadn't been an accident. The timing hadn't been coincidence. The man on Highway 37 wasn't a person. He was something else. Something patient, deliberate, existing in a schedule I could neither predict nor understand. Back at the station, I wrote in my log, trying to make sense of it. Stalled car call. No vehicle found. Individual on roadway, unknown identity. Did not respond to approach. Event coincides with heavy storm. Observed shadow distortions. Individual disappeared without trace. Status unknown. I left the report there. Filed it professional, neutral, sterile. Because if I recorded my own fear, my own disbelief, my own certainty that whatever I saw wasn't human, it would look like insanity. I drove home slowly that morning, headlights cutting through the last of the storm. I kept glancing at the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see a figure standing in the wet distance. A man who didn't belong to this world. I never saw him again. But sometimes when the wind carries the smell of rain on asphalt, when a storm rolls across the county late at night, I think I feel him standing just beyond the edge of vision, watching, waiting, silent, patient, and impossible. And I remember the call, the storm, the moment the world held its breath, the 317 of my own timeline, the man on Highway 37. I shouldn't have been surprised, not really. Red Hollow had a way of bending reality just enough to make you doubt your own senses. And yet, when I saw the first form, a cold shiver ran down my spine. I was in the station office, alone except for the hum of the old heater and the occasional creak of the building settling. A stack of census forms sat neatly on the counter. Papers I've been instructed to organize, check, and file. Standard procedure. Or so I thought. The pen lay beside them, ordinary, unremarkable, until it moved. I saw it first in the corner of my eye. A slow tilt, the nib scratching faintly against the paper. I froze. My heart thudded. There was no wind, no vibration, nothing to explain it. The pen moved steadily, deliberately, writing names I did not recognize. Hail, Thomas. I blinked. The name wasn't familiar, and yet somehow it felt weighty, important. I glanced down at the first sheet. Every line already filled with names, each accompanied by birth dates, addresses, and an enigmatic note under status. Present. My fingers twitched. I wanted to snatch the paper, pull the pen away, call it trick of the light. But when I reached for it, the pen lifted, then returned to the paper, continuing without hesitation. I leaned closer. The names rolled out like a litany. Miller, Sarah. Jackson, Eli. Turner, Agnes. Each name paired with an age, an address on streets that didn't exist, or streets that once existed but were long gone. Each marked present. I swallowed hard. I remembered walking the empty streets the previous night. The houses abandoned, dark, empty. There was no one there. No Sarah Miller. No Eli Jackson. No Agnes Turner. And yet, the paper insisted they were here. Present. Alive in some sense I couldn't understand. I whispered to myself, this isn't real. It's not real. But the pen didn't stop. I couldn't stop it. Even if I left the office, the paper would continue. The names filling every sheet over and over. I reached for my notebook instead, trying to document what I saw. Pen moves on its own. Names written. Residents present. No one alive. Time stretched. I wrote it like that, shaking, hoping that recording would make sense later. But it didn't. Recording it didn't make sense. Reality didn't make sense. I looked around the office. Dust motes floated in the weak light. The hum of the heater sounded louder now, like a warning. The shadows in the corners were darker, and for the first time, I noticed the floors beneath the counter. They weren't completely still. A subtle ripple, a faint pressure, like someone had walked there moments ago. I ran my hand over the forms. The ink felt wet, fresh, impossibly so. I could still see the nib marks, sharp and deliberate. And the names, some I recognized from old census reports, decades ago, people long dead. I dropped the forms back onto the counter. This isn't happening, I said aloud. My voice cracked, swallowed by the stillness of the office. I didn't even hear myself. But the pen paused. Then, slowly, it resumed, continuing to write with unnerving precision. Clark, Henry. Ward, Emily. McBride, Joseph. I knew the names. All of them. Ghosts recorded in historical documents. Deceased for decades. But here they were, present, as if the town itself refused to acknowledge their absence. I remember the houses on the outskirts. Warm floors. Footprints in dust that led nowhere. Chairs pushed back as if someone had just stood. And now this. The paper confirmed what my senses had already guessed. Red Hollow was alive in its own way. The dead didn't leave. And the town had a record. I tried to leave the office. Tried to convince myself I was imagining it. But the moment I stepped toward the door, the temperature dropped sharply, like the air itself had weight. The paper rustled. Names continued to appear, flowing endlessly. I could feel the pressure of the town against me, silent but insistent. like it wanted me to stay and witness. I went back to the counter, unable to resist. I traced a finger over the newest entries. Ages and addresses made no sense. Some were decades older than they should be. Some hadn't existed when the person was born. And yet, in Red Hollow, all was possible. All was observed. All was preserved. I whispered, almost to myself, "How? Why?" No answer, but the pen stopped. For a heartbeat, the office was silent, and the air loosened. I thought maybe I could leave. Maybe I could step out and escape. But then the pen slid again, writing a new entry. My name. I recoiled. My name. It was written neatly, precisely, age, current address listed, present. I staggered back, staring at the paper, shaking. My hands went cold. I had only been here a few nights. I had not interacted with anyone, had not lived in this town, had not officially existed here at all. And yet, Red Hollow had claimed me, already observing me, already recording me, already considering me one of the present. I couldn't tear my eyes away. Each new page filled, the list growing longer. Names that should have been gone, names that had vanished from memory, names that I had never heard of before, and all marked present. The town cataloged them all, alive, or in some sense that escaped definition. I tried to tear the forms, crumple them, throw them away. The paper returned to the counter, flat, neat, clean. The ink remained, fresh, unbroken. And the names continued. I realized then that Red Hollow didn't measure time the way I did. It didn't measure life the way I did. Death was suggestion here. Absence was ignored. Everyone who had ever lived in this town, or had been claimed by it, remained, observed, logged, counted, present. I sat down heavily in the chair, trying to catch my breath. My mind raced. What was my place in this? I had come as an observer, an outsider, a temporary presence. But the forms had already written me in, already declared me present. I had become part of the town's ledger, whether I wanted it or not. I glanced at the shadows again. The hum beneath the floor seemed to rise, almost as if in satisfaction. The windows reflected only darkness, but the darkness felt thick, aware. The walls themselves seemed to lean closer, pressing in, ensuring that I saw the forms, read the names, understood the pattern. I tried to step outside to escape, but the door handle wouldn't budge. The air thickened. I could feel the subtle pressure beneath my boots, moving toward me, as though the floor itself was guiding me back. I realized then that Red Hollow didn't want me wandering. It wanted me watching, recording, witnessing, and now, listed as present, I was tied to it. I sank back into the chair, feeling the room shift, the hum vibrating in my chest, the shadows deepening in the corners. The pen moved once more, sliding across a new sheet, filling names I didn't recognize. And yet, the list felt complete, the ledger eternal. I whispered my own name again. Why? No answer came, only the scratch of ink, the hum of the floor, the shadows pressing closer. The census would never stop. The names would never end. The town recorded all who had touched it, all who had been claimed, all who were, no matter the years, no matter death, present. I realized that night that observing Red Hollow came with a price. Not money, not danger, not fear alone. The town demanded acknowledgement, participation, and the ledger was proof, a record of existence that could not be erased. I stared at the forms until dawn, my name written, names without bodies, ages without context, lives that should have ended, cataloged as eternal. And somewhere deep inside me, I understood that leaving would not undo my presence. Red Hollow had already claimed me, already logged me, already made me part of its endless record. I didn't sleep that morning. I couldn't, not with the list before me. The hum beneath my feet, the shadows waiting for attention. I wrote down everything I remembered, every name, every age, every detail. And I swore I would keep the ledger, keep the record, keep the watch, because the town required it, because Red Hollow never forgets, and because the forms would never stop. Names without bodies, present, always. And now me, the first time I noticed them, I almost didn't see them, not because they were hidden, but because I wasn't expecting them. I had walked down the main street of Red Hollow after finishing my nightly observations in the station office. Notebook in hand, flashlight cutting weak arcs across cracked pavement. The town was silent as usual, the houses dark and empty, or so I thought. I passed the corner house at the end of the street, the one with the porch sagging so low it looked like it might collapse under its own weight. And that's when I saw it, a figure, tall, standing just inside the doorway, perfectly still. I froze. My stomach tightened. Rain had begun to fall again. Light at first, then heavier, tapping the roof, rolling down the streets. And yet this figure didn't move, didn't react. Not a blink, not a breath. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow, maybe a reflection from my flashlight, maybe a tree bending strangely in the wind. But as I focused, the figure didn't disappear. It didn't shift. It remained silent, patient, and unyielding. I took a cautious step forward. The air around it seemed different, thicker, cooler. It didn't smell like wet wood or rain or old houses. It smelled like nothing at all. Empty, the absence of everything, and yet somehow it pressed against me. I whispered, almost to myself, "Hello?" No response. Of course, there wasn't any. The figure didn't breathe. There was no hint of air moving across its clothing. Its eyes, if there were eyes, didn't blink. It didn't seem to exist in the normal sense, yet it was undeniably there. I backed up slightly, my mind racing. This is impossible. This can't exist. I've been here too long. I'm tired. My brain is inventing things, but my body refused to leave. My flashlight flicked across its form again. The outline was human, vaguely, but proportions seemed off. Its head tilted slightly as if examining me, though I couldn't detect the slightest motion of muscle. I kept walking, trying to maintain a semblance of control. Door after door, house after house. Sometimes the figures were alone. Sometimes there were two, three, standing silently in the shadows of doorways. Always the same, always still, always present, yet impossibly inhuman. I began noting them in my notebook. House on corner, one figure. Doorway, standing, no breathing, no blinking, no sound. Air, absence around figure. My pen scratched across the paper, like it was shaking with me. I remembered the warm floors in the houses I had inspected the previous night, the pressure marks on chairs, the faint scent of meals long since rotted away, and now these figures just watching, not reacting to the storm, not reacting to me, as if they had always been there, always waiting and always observing. One doorway held two figures, a man and a woman, I think, hard to tell. Their shapes were clear, their outline solid, but nothing about them breathed life. I imagined their chests rising and falling, a quiet rhythm, but it didn't happen. They stood like statues that had waited decades and would wait decades more. I tried to look away, but my body refused. There was a gravity here, subtle, unyielding, the kind that tells you that you are being measured, judged, not threatened, not yet, but counted, recorded, like the census forms I had watched fill themselves. These figures were proof that Red Hollow didn't care about absence. It preserved, it observed, and now it had a live witness. Me. I noticed something else as I walked. Shadows, not the natural shadows cast by my flashlight, but deeper shadows clinging to the edges of door frames, stretching unnaturally across walls and porches. They seemed to react to the figures, as if the darkness itself had mass and intention. I shivered. Every hair on my arm stood on end. I remember the first night I saw one. The rain had been lighter then, a mist more than a storm. I had been stepping cautiously across the street when a figure appeared in the window of an old house. I froze. I told myself to breathe slowly, to stay calm, and that it was only my imagination. But the moment I looked, the figure turned in the doorway, eyes fixed on me. No eyelids moved, no pulse. Yet I felt it, watching, present, alive in a way I couldn't understand. I stepped back, trying to retreat to the safety of the station. But as I turned, I noticed the figures had multiplied. Not physically exactly, but perceptually. Houses I had passed hours ago now held one. Another, always at the threshold, always staring. And somehow, the further I walked, the more I noticed them, until it felt like the entire street was lined with these people who didn't need air. I began whispering to myself, trying to ground my thoughts. They don't move. They don't breathe. They exist. The words sounded insane even to me. I knew that, but the town insisted on making the impossible real. And I understood painfully that I was not just observing. I was participating. My presence confirmed theirs. My watching was part of their reality. I stopped in the middle of the street, shaking. Rain plastered my hair to my forehead. I shined the flashlight along the row of houses, trying to count. 20, maybe 30 figures. Sometimes one, sometimes a pair, always in doorways, never leaving, never blinking. And then, when I blinked, a few more had appeared, as if the night had grown tired of waiting. I remembered the ledger, names without bodies. Present, recorded. These figures were living or unliving. Proof that Red Hollow never allowed absence. The dead didn't leave. The missing were cataloged. And these figures, these people who didn't need air, didn't need light, didn't need warmth. They were the town's version of permanence. I took a cautious step toward one, flashlight trembling. My reflection in the wet asphalt flickered and distorted in the puddles at my feet. The figure didn't move, didn't react, yet I could feel its awareness. Something in the way the air clung to the edges of the doorway. Something in the way the shadows leaned toward it. My chest tightened. I felt trapped between the impossibility of what I was seeing and the undeniable reality of its presence. I whispered into my notebook, pen shaking. Doorway. Figure present. No respiration. No blinking. Shadows observed. Air heavy. Temperature drops. Hours passed. Or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless in Red Hollow. Each figure remained unwavering. And I realized that leaving the street, the block, the town, was no longer just a matter of walking. Their observation was patient, eternal, and it didn't matter if I turned away. The town accounted for my gaze, my presence, my acknowledgement. I backed toward the station, flashlight swinging, trying to keep the figures in view. None blinked, none moved, none breathed, and yet each step felt measured, as if they knew the distance I would allow myself to retreat, as if the space between us was a form of control. Inside the station office, I exhaled shakily. I locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't stop anything. The figures didn't chase, didn't follow, didn't need doors. They simply existed, always present, always observing. I sat down heavily, pen in hand, recording every detail, every doorway, every porch, every figure standing silent. Still impossible. I wrote the ways the shadows clung, the ways the air felt wrong, the way my own breath seemed loud in comparison to their absence of it. And then, inevitably, I wrote my own name, trembling, observer present, because I understood now. The ledger of names, the census forms, the warm floors and abandoned homes, all of it pointed to one truth. Red Hollow was alive in ways no human could survive. The dead did not leave. The town did not forget. And those who remained didn't need air to exist. I closed my notebook and stared out the window. The street was black, silent except for the occasional drip of rain. I knew they were there, standing in doorways, waiting, patient beyond comprehension, observing me as I observed them. And I realized with a sinking certainty that this night, like all nights, would not end. Not until the town allowed it. Not until the figures who didn't need air had finished counting me as present. And I would remain, watching, writing, breathing, existing for as long as Red Hollow demanded it. I knew something was different the moment I stepped into the station office that morning. Not the usual chill in the air. Not the usual hum from the heater or the slight creak of the old floorboards settling. No, this was heavier, pressing down in a way that made my chest ache. I felt in my boots, under my soles, vibrating up my legs. The ledger sat on the counter, waiting, or rather, it knew I was coming. I had grown accustomed to the census forms filling themselves out, the names appearing with mechanical patience, the present marks recording the town's permanent residents, dead, absent, forgotten. I'd seen the warm floors and abandoned houses, the figures in doorways who didn't need air, and I had accepted that Red Hollow's version of life and death was not human, not normal. But that morning, as I approached the counter, I felt a subtle shift in the ledger's rhythm. It started with the numbers. The population count, neatly tallied at the bottom of the last page, had changed overnight, not by 1 or 2 entries, by dozens, pages of names I had never seen before, names that had no records in any county files, historical or recent, and yet the ledger insisted they were present. I picked up the pen, my hand trembling, and flicked it across the paper. Nothing. The names didn't move. But when I set the pen down, they began again, new entries, creeping along the margins, filling empty lines. Some names were familiar in shape, familiar in tone, but none I could place. The handwriting wasn't mine. Not human. Precise. Cold. I whispered aloud, though the office was empty. Who else is here? No answer, of course. But the air itself seemed to respond. The shadows in the corners thickened. The hum beneath the floor rose slightly, almost imperceptibly, like the building inhaling. And then I noticed it, tiny movements, just at the edges of my vision. Not the doorframe figures from the night before, but something else. Something smaller. Something multiplying. I backed away from the counter, notebook in hand, jotting frantically. Ledger count increased. Unknown residents. Names present. No trace of bodies. Shadows move independently. Air thicker. Pressure rising. The room felt alive. Not warm. Not welcoming. Alive. And I began to understand something I had been ignoring. Red Hollow's population was not static. It had never been static. It grew. It adapted. And the ledger recorded everything. I tried to focus on the new names. Some were children, their ages scribbled in impossibly neat numbers, as though they had never breathed a day of life. Others were elderly, older than any living memory. Some born before the town even existed in official records. Each marked present. Each counted. I realized with a sinking weight in my stomach that I was watching the town's population expand. Not through birth, not through migration, but through some other unknowable process. Something that did not need human rules. Human air, human time. I stood still, trying to reason it out. Perhaps this is some kind of psychological projection. Stress, isolation. I am seeing patterns where none exist. But deep down, I knew better. I had walked the streets at night, seen the figures, noted the empty houses with warm floors. Red Hollow was not empty. It never had been. And now, the ledger confirmed it. I began flipping through the pages, each sheet heavier with names. I lost count after 100, 200, 300, and the ink never smudged. The handwriting never wavered. Each name precise, exact, alive on the page in a way that made the air hum around me. I tried calling dispatch, tried reaching out for some rational authority, but the radio crackled uselessly. No signal, no static, nothing. Even my phone refused to work, dead in my hand. I realized then that Red Hollow had no need for the outside world. The town itself was a pocket universe, growing, recording, and sustaining life in its own terrifying sense. I looked back at the ledger. One of the new names caught my eye. My own, written neatly, carefully labeled present. I froze. I had been aware of my presence before, in the form of the stationary census forms and the doorframe figures. But seeing it here in the official record confirmed it. I was not a visitor. I was part of the count, already counted, already included in the population that expanded without reason, without depth, without logic. I pressed my hand against the table, trying to steady myself. My pulse raced. I had to understand. I had to see what this meant. I flipped forward, looking at the new entries. Some had addresses, streets that no longer existed, buildings that had collapsed decades ago. Others had none at all, just names, ages, and the word present. I realized then that the town's population was not made of people. Exactly, not all of them. Some of these presences were echoes, fragments, imprints of life that had once existed, or maybe never existed in the human sense. They didn't breathe, they didn't eat, they didn't blink, and yet they were counted, cataloged, acknowledged. I ran my fingers over the ledger pages. The air thickened. My chest tightened. I remembered the figures in doorways at night, standing still, unblinking, the warm floors, the shadows that moved independently. And now I saw the pattern. The town itself was alive, and its population included more than just humans. Something else had grown among us, and it was still growing. I tried to leave the office, tried to step outside to escape, but the door handle felt heavy, resistant, like the town itself wanted me inside. I pressed harder, my shoulder against the wood, but it didn't budge. The air grew colder, heavier. Shadows lengthened across the floor, creeping toward me, and the faint vibration beneath my boots became unmistakable. Something was moving below the floorboards, something alive, counting, adding to population without a word, without a body, without form. I realized then that Red Hollow didn't just observe. It created, it absorbed, it replicated. Names appeared on paper before anything or anyone manifested in the streets. The figures in doorways, the warm floors, the silent, airless watchers, they were all part of the same system. The population increased because the town required it, and I had become part of it, already counted, already included in the final adjustment. I sank into the chair behind the counter, notebook in hand, heart hammering. My mind raced with the implications. I had thought the town preserved the past, kept records of the departed, cataloged the absent, but this was beyond preservation. Red Hollow was alive in a way I couldn't comprehend. It was self-sustaining, self-expanding, and indifferent to logic. I watched the ledger as the pen hovered over a blank line, then slowly moved again. New names appeared. A child, a man, a woman. Some I recognized, some I did not. Ages impossible, addresses imaginary or long destroyed. And each marked present, each counted, each added to the growing population of a town that should have been abandoned. I thought of the nights I had walked the streets, the figures in the doorways, the warm floors and empty houses. Every observation, every encounter, every fleeting moment of unease. It was all part of the same process. Red Hollow did not forget. Red Hollow did not allow absence. Red Hollow expanded. And now, so had I realized with a cold clarity that I could never leave. Not truly. Not as long as the ledger existed. Not as long as the town required witnesses. My presence, like the names on the pages, had been absorbed into the population. I was counted. My observation had become part of the system. And the system never stopped counting, never stopped adjusting, never allowed subtraction. The room grew darker as the sun rose, or what passed for sunrise in this pocket of reality. The shadows thickened in the corners, closer now, pressing against the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I could feel the vibration beneath me, the subtle, impossible movement of the building itself. The pen moved across the page, filling in more names, more presences, more entities I could neither comprehend nor escape. I tried to stand, to step back, but the pressure around me was relentless. The town demanded acknowledgement, observation, participation. The population increased because Red Hollow willed it so, because it was alive, because it needed witnesses like me to exist. I sank back into the chair, exhausted. My hands trembled as I wrote, recording everything I could, trying to impose some human logic on the incomprehensible. New entries, old entries, names without bodies, presences without form, the final count adjusting itself continuously. And I understood this was the town's power. This was its life. This was the truth. Red Hollow's population was not limited to humans, not limited to the living. It included shadows, echoes, fragments, imprints, and now me. And it would continue to grow, endlessly, silently, eternally. I wrote my own name at the bottom of the ledger, trembling, present. And I knew it was true. I arrived in Ashford Hollow just after dusk. The sky bruised with streaks of purple and gray, the kind of evening that makes the edges of the world feel soft and uncertain. The town itself looked like a memory trapped in smoke, the kind you can almost touch but can't quite hold. Buildings charred from the old factory fire lined the main street, their windows blackened, doors warped. Shattered signs hung by a single hinge, swinging lazily in the evening wind. Not a soul in sight. I had come as a travel blogger, chasing ghost towns, abandoned places, The kind of spots photographers dream about for moody shots. I was used to emptiness, to silence, but Ashford Hollow felt different. It was not just quiet. It was waiting. The air was heavy with it, as if the town had held its breath since the fire, holding back some truth it didn't want me to see. I wandered down the cracked street, boots crunching over broken glass and scattered ashes, taking pictures, narrating from my phone, whispering into the microphone I kept attached to my collar. I tried to keep the humor in my voice, something light to counter the chill in my spine. Abandoned towns are spooky but photogenic, I murmured. And then I saw it. The neon sign was flickering, a stuttered orange glow against a blackened brick. The Ember Bar. One letter in the sign was missing, the R in Ember, so it read MB_bar. But the light was on. Inside, a warm amber glow spilled out the doorway, cutting a path through the smoke-stained street. I stopped. It didn't make sense. Every other building in town was dark, burned out, condemned. The factory had been destroyed decades ago. The record said the town had been abandoned not long after. Yet here was a bar, operating, lights on, doors unlocked, and faintly music, something soft and melancholic, the kind of tune that settles deep into your chest. Curiosity pulled me forward. I pushed the door open, and the warmth hit me immediately. The smell of wood-polished spilled beer and something faintly sweet I couldn't identify. It smelled alive, human, even. The air inside seemed heavier, dense and outside, full of presence. I froze just inside the threshold, listening. The bar was empty, or at least it appeared so. The lights reflected off polished wood, shining across empty stools and tables. A long counter stretched the length of the room. Shelves of bottles lined the back wall, dust-free, as if someone polished them yesterday. A jukebox in the corner played the soft melody I had heard, though the bar seemed otherwise deserted. "Hello," I called softly. My voice sounded tiny, swallowed by the warm air. No answer. I stepped further inside, boots echoing on the wooden floor. The door swung shut behind me with a faint click. I hesitated at the bar, examining the bottles. They were all labeled neat but unfamiliar. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, as if catching light that wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat. I had never seen anything like it. And still, no one appeared. No bartender. No patrons. Just the hum of the jukebox. The faint tick of a clock somewhere behind a hidden wall. I walked toward the counter slowly. The bar felt alive. Not human alive, but aware alive. Like it knew I was here, measuring me, judging the way I moved, how I looked at it. My hand hovered over the counter, trembling slightly. I didn't touch anything. I wasn't sure I wanted to. Then I noticed the chairs. Some had faint indentations in the cushions, as if someone had just been sitting there. Footprints in the dust on the floor, leading from table to table, ending at no one. And the jukebox, somehow, it felt like it played for a person I couldn't see. I whispered to myself, "Am I alone?" I didn't answer. Not even the music. It just played, soft and endless. I walked past the tables and toward the corner of the room where the shadows pooled. I could feel them watching, not with eyes, not with intention, but a sense of being measured, counted, accounted for. I reached a small side room, a glassed-in booth with menus left in neat stacks. On one table, I saw a half-filled glass of amber liquid, condensation glistening on the outside. I swear I could see faint ripples on its surface, as if someone had just lifted it. My throat tightened. No one was here. There was no one to lift it. I stepped back, bumping against the bar, and the glass wobbled slightly. Then it stopped. The room was silent again. I moved to the counter once more, scanning the empty seats, and noticed the cash register. The drawer was open, though no money sat inside. Just a faint warmth, like it had been touched moments ago. And somewhere just out of reach of sight, I could swear a low exhale passed through the room. Not loud, not audible, but enough to make the hair on my arms rise. I stepped back, almost tripping over the edge of the chair. My hand shook as I fumbled for my camera, taking a few pictures. The flash lit the room briefly, reflecting off polished bottles, empty stools, and a shadow at the far end of the bar. I froze. My heart pounded. The shadows shifted just slightly. Not human, not fully, like a memory trying to form. I swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. When my eyes adjusted, nothing remained. Only the warm glow of the bar and the empty stools. I backed toward the door. I needed air, needed to step back outside, and convince myself this was just a hallucination, a trick of isolation and exhaustion. But the moment my hand touched the door, the jukebox shifted in tone, playing a note longer, slower, like it was acknowledging me. I shivered. I paused in the doorway. Outside, the street was silent, empty. Ashford Hollow was asleep or dead. Inside, the bar waited, humming softly, breathing with a life I couldn't see. It wasn't just open, it was alive. And somehow, it had been expecting me. I couldn't explain why, but I felt compelled to step back in, to observe, to record. My hand shook as I raised the camera again, whispering to the microphone, narrating for my blog, though my voice quavered. This bar is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's open, no staff, no patrons, and yet it's alive. It feels alive. A chair rocked slightly near the back, the kind of movement that shouldn't have happened. My breath caught. I froze, and then it stopped. I convinced myself it was just gravity, just the building settling. But the warmth of the air, the faint smell of something, having just poured a drink, the low hum that wasn't music. It all said otherwise. I walked further into the bar, documenting everything. The warm floorboards, the half-empty glass, the untouched menus. I even dared to step behind the bar. The register drawer glowed faintly, the coins inside glimmering as if lit from some invisible source. I could almost hear the pulse of the place, a slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. And then I noticed a mirror behind the bottles. My reflection stared back, alone. At first, I felt relief. Just me. Then the image shifted slightly, like the reflection wanted to breathe differently than I did. My eyes were wide, but in the glass, they lingered longer than they should have. My lips moved, but the reflection held its shape, smiling faintly. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the camera. I didn't want to touch the mirror, didn't want to see it again. And then the jukebox changed songs, playing something faster, more insistent. And I heard it, just under the melody, a faint, whispered sigh. Not a voice, not a word, just awareness. I left the bar that night with pictures, shaky footage, and a notebook full of hurried observations. The street outside was cold, quiet, abandoned. Ashford Hollow seemed normal again, waiting under the moonlight as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. I felt in my bones. The Ember Bar had stayed open for a reason. It had waited. It had known I would come. And I understood, in that small, trembling way you understand impossible truths, that the bar wasn't just a business. It was a presence, a sentinel, alive in a way I couldn't define, watching, waiting, and somehow feeding. Even now, writing this, I can feel it. Warmth where there should be none. A faint hum in the corner of my vision. The memory of the glass, the moving chair, the shifting reflection. And I know I will return, because the bar is open, always open, and it's waiting. Ashford Hollow is gone, burned, abandoned. The factory destroyed it. Yet the Ember Bar remains, standing, glowing, breathing alive. And I am drawn to it, always drawn. I returned to the Ember Bar that night with a sense of purpose I couldn't quite explain. I told myself it was for content, for my blog, my videos, my followers. But deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. Something about that place had reached into me the first night, settling behind my ribs, in my chest, whispering that I wasn't done. The street outside was quiet, empty. Ashford Hollow held its silence like a breath held too long. I could see the bar's flickering orange glow from the cracked street lamp. It called to me, patient, waiting. I pulled the door open and stepped inside. The warmth hit me immediately, thick and familiar. The smell of polished wood and faintly sweet alcohol wrapping around me. The bar appeared empty at first. The jukebox played a slow, mournful tune. The stools glistened under the dim light. I set down my bag and notebook, heart thudding as I moved the counter. And then I noticed something different. Figures. sitting at tables near the windows against the wall. Not all of them, but a few, watching, waiting. I froze. My hand hovered over my notebook. My breath caught in my throat. These weren't like the figures I had glimpsed in abandoned towns before. They were more real, human-shaped, clothed, proportioned correctly. But as I looked closer, the strangest thing hit me. They cast no reflection. The mirror behind the bar reflected me perfectly. The polished bottles glimmered, the counter shone, but not a single one of them appeared in the glass. I swallowed hard. My pen shook in my hand. I told myself it was a trick of the dim light, the smoky haze, maybe even exhaustion. But the shadows on the floor moved around them, bending slightly to avoid their shapes, like the light acknowledged them, but reality did not. They didn't speak at first. They simply sat poised, silent. Their eyes were clear, attentive, staring at the bar, at nothing, at everything. And then one of them, an older man, graying hair, neat jacket, lifted a hand and gestured toward the empty bartender station. Not toward me, not to signal me, but as if he expected something to appear. And it did. A glass slid from the counter toward him, filled with amber liquid. The movement was impossible. No one had touched it. The drink stopped perfectly in front of him. He lifted it as if to drink. But the liquid did not move. His lips pressed to the rim. No sound. No ripple. His chest rose, but the drink stayed still, unaffected. I took a step back, whispering to myself, What is happening? Another figure. This one a young woman. Glanced at the jukebox, and a drink appeared in front of her, dark, thick, almost glowing in the low light. She lifted it, tilted it slightly, but it remained perfect, undisturbed. No one sipped, no one drank, and yet the air around them seemed charged, like the presence of consumption without intake, like hunger that could not be satisfied. I realized then that the bar wasn't serving drinks in the ordinary sense. It was creating them for a purpose I couldn't comprehend. These patrons weren't here to drink, weren't here to speak, weren't here to exist as we know existence. They were part of the Ember Bar's rhythm, its pulse, and I was intruding. I raised my camera slowly, trying to record without drawing attention. The figures didn't move. They didn't acknowledge me, but I could feel them, not in sight, not in sound, but in the air around me, like the bar itself had distributed a weight across the room, pressing against me, reminding me I was not alone. A man in the corner, older than anyone should be, lifted a glass that appeared out of thin air. He stared at it, then set it down. The liquid didn't spill, not a drop. His hand hovered for a moment, then disappeared. The next instant, a new glass appeared in front of the figure by the window, someone who hadn't been there a moment before. I realized the patrons weren't arriving in any human sense. They were manifesting. One moment, empty chairs. The next moment, presence, and the bar provided. Not food, not comfort, not warmth, only drink, only the illusion of life that could not consume. I stepped closer to the counter, notebook open, pen scribbling furiously. I wrote, figures present, no reflection. Drinks appear spontaneously, no movement from bartender. Drinks undisturbed by contact. Presence felt, not seen, impossible physics. The jukebox shifted, changing its melody to a slightly faster, more insistent tune. The figures reacted subtly. The woman at the end of the counter tilted her head slightly, almost in time with the music. Though her eyes never blinked, I could feel the bar responding to them. Each note a command, each shadow a caretaker, maintaining their impossible state. I wanted to speak, to ask the figures why they were here, what they wanted, what they needed, but I couldn't. Not a word would come. My throat felt tight, as if the air itself resisted speech. And the longer I stared, the more I understood. This wasn't about conversation. It was about observation, about presence, about acknowledgement. I walked around the table slowly, careful not to bump anything. The glasses shimmered in the light, reflecting patterns that weren't there. Liquid caught between movement and stillness. Each figure sat patiently, watching, not me exactly, not the room, but something beyond, something that tied them all together. I had seen a fraction of it before, read hollow, the ledger, the figures in doorways. But this was different, more intimate, more intentional. A faint breeze swept through the bar, though the doors hadn't opened. My hair lifted slightly. One of the glasses trembled, not from wind, not from touch. Something unseen had moved it. The figure closest to it didn't react. No blink, no breath, and yet the glass settled, perfect again, untouched. I whispered into my notebook. The bar serves a missing. They do not consume. They are maintained, alive in a sense, but not as we know it, present without presence, counted without form. I took a shaky breath and stepped back to the doorway. My reflection was normal in the mirror this time, but the patrons remained absent from it. The doorframe figures of Red Hollow came to mind, the warm floors, the names on ledgers. And now, in Ashford Hollow, the Ember Bar had its own version. Patrons who existed in a suspended state, consuming nothing yet always served. I felt the weight of it, the purpose, the inevitability. The bar created them, maintained them, held them in place. It was alive, not in the way a human is, but in a way that defied explanation. It fed on acknowledgement, on being seen, on recognition, and I had walked right into its orbit. I tried to leave, stepped toward the door. The warm glow outside welcomed me, the cold air brushing my face. But something inside resisted. The jukebox skipped a note, subtle, a tiny deviation. The nearest patron lifted their glass slightly, just enough to remind me I was being observed. And leaving without acknowledgement was not an option. I stepped back, reluctantly, my camera shaking in my hands. I realized that documenting wasn't optional. Observing wasn't optional. Witnessing the impossible was the only way the bar allowed me to exist in its space. I settled onto a stool, my notebook open, pen trembling, documenting each movement or lack thereof. The older man in the corner tilted his head imperceptibly. The woman at the window adjusted her posture. The glasses shimmered under impossible physics. I wrote furiously, aware that every detail mattered. The Ember Bar didn't exist for entertainment or profit or comfort. It existed for preservation, for maintaining those who could not live, yet could not leave. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time had no meaning here. The patrons never moved beyond their chairs. The drinks never spilled. The jukebox hummed its endless tune, keeping the rhythm steady. And I wrote, observed, witnessed, became part of the bar's rhythm, without realizing it. By the time I finally stepped outside, dawn approaching, the Ember Bar glowed softly behind me, alive, waiting, humming with the impossible. The street was quiet, empty again. Ashford Hollow slumbered under the haze of morning. The fire-scarred building silent, but I knew better. The bar stayed open, always open, and inside, the missing had their drinks. They would not consume them. They would remain, watching, waiting, preserved, and I would return, drawn by necessity, by curiosity, by something deeper, something primal. The Ember Bar existed for the missing, and somehow I understood, trembling, that I had become part of their audience, a witness to what could not be explained, yet could not be ignored. And as I walked away, the neon flicker fading behind me, I knew it would be waiting, always open, always alive, always holding the missing, the impossible, the present without presence. I would return, because some places don't let you leave, and some drinks are served forever, even if they can never be drunk. I thought I knew the Ember Bar by the time I returned that night. I had walked its floorboards, watched the glasses appear out of nowhere, seen the patrons who did not cast reflections sip drinks they could not consume. I thought I understood the rhythm, the pulse, the rules. But that night, I realized how wrong I had been. The air outside was damp, thick with the smell of rain and burned wood. Ashford Hollow had a way of smelling like memory, like a wound that never healed. I approached the bar, hesitant, my steps slow against a cracked street. The neon flicker of the Ember Bar glowed warmly, impossibly, like a lighthouse in a sea of charred buildings. The door swung open easily, the warmth washing over me. Inside, the same low melody from the jukebox greeted me, but it sounded different, sharper somehow. as though it had tuned itself to the presence of someone new, someone living. Me, I stepped inside and froze. The patrons were there, of course, their forms as still as statues, yet somehow heavier in the room, pressing against the air, absorbing it. They stare at nothing, or perhaps at something I could not see, their lips tight, hands resting just above glasses that trembled with impossible liquid. But the bartender was new, or rather, he was the first I had actually seen. A man in his 50s, lined face, tired eyes, standing behind the counter as if he had been waiting for me all along. His uniform was simple, neat, dark, and he carried the kind of calm that made the room itself still. I swallowed. My throat felt thick. "I've been expecting you," he said softly, voice low and measured. Not a greeting, not a welcome, a statement. And somehow I believed it. I don't understand. I managed, my words coming out uneven, shaky. All of this, they're here, but I trailed off. "They are here," he said, finishing my thought. "But not as you know it. They're all gone. All of them. Died long ago. This bar, it keeps them. It preserves them. Their presence continues." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Keeps them, preserve them?" "Yes," he said. He moved slowly, gracefully, as if time bent for him. "This bar isn't a place for the living. Not truly. You can stay, observe, even interact. But understand this. Everyone you see has already passed. They do not consume. They do not breathe. They only exist here, in the rhythm of the ember." I wanted to speak, to argue, to laugh, anything to break the tension that settled like ice in my chest. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I simply nodded, my hands trembling, feeling the weight of his words settle on me. "And now," he continued, "someone new has arrived." His eyes met mine, steady, unwavering. "You." I swallowed hard. My stomach twisted. A cold knot forming as the room seemed to press inward. I thought I had been observing, documenting, existing outside of this impossible system. But the bartender's words made it clear. I wasn't a visitor. I was now a participant, part of the rhythm, part of the cycle. The patrons shifted almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging my presence. The air thickened, vibrating faintly. I felt it. The same pulse I had sensed before, but stronger, more insistent. The bar recognized me, and it was marking my arrival. I stepped closer to the counter, my camera hanging uselessly around my neck. The bartender poured a drink for me, not a human pour. No hand touched the glass. No sound of liquid. And yet, the amber liquid shimmered, perfect, complete, waiting. "You may take it," he said, eyes steady on mine. "But it will not satisfy you. It is not meant to." I lifted the glass, my hand shaking, and stared at the liquid. It caught the dim light and seemed to ripple with something alive, something aware. I could feel it pressing against me, testing me, reminding me that I was now part of this place. "Why?" I whispered. "Why show me this?" He leaned forward slightly, and for the first time I noticed a fine lines in his eyes, the wear of decades of watching, of tending. Because it must be known. Those who come here must understand. Closing time never comes. There's no last call, no end, only presence, only acknowledgement, only observation. I felt a shiver crawl down my spine, the weight of eternity press against me, subtle but unrelenting. I glanced at the patrons. They remained still, sipping, staring, waiting. They didn't breathe. Their eyes didn't blink. And yet, I could feel them, faintly insistent, like shadows folded into corners of my mind. The bartender poured another drink, this time setting it before one of the older figures at the corner table. The glass trembled slightly, as though aware of my gaze, then settled perfectly. I realized with a creeping chill that the bar wasn't serving the living. It was maintaining the absent, preserving the dead in a form that could be observed, acknowledged, recorded. And me, I had arrived too late to be an observer only. I was now a part of the system. I took notes furiously, writing as fast as I could. Patrons present but deceased. Drinks appear spontaneously. Do not consume. Air thick. Observation required. Participation unavoidable. The words felt inadequate. How could I explain what it was like to watch life preserved without life? To see presence maintained without breath, without consumption, without form? The bartender leaned back slightly, hands resting on the polished wood. "You will notice patterns," he said. "Glances, gestures, the shifting of glasses, the hum of the jukebox. Everything is deliberate. Everything is accounted for. The Ember Bar keeps track. Always has. Always will." I nodded, my pen shaking. "And me?" "You are counted now," he said simply. "Part of the rhythm. One of the living now observed. One of the witnesses. You may leave, but the bar never closes. Time here does not pass to those it keeps. Closing time never comes. Someone new will always arrive. And tonight it is you." I felt my pulse spike, a tight knot in my chest. The weight of his words pressed down on me. I wanted to step back, to leave, to argue against the impossible. But the air itself seemed to resist movement, holding me in place, steadying me, reminding me that I had arrived, that I was counted. I watched the patrons again. A young woman lifted her glass, tilting it slightly, but the liquid didn't move. A man in the corner adjusted his coat, hands resting just above the drink, which remained undisturbed. They were alive only in the sense that they existed, only in the sense that the bar maintained them. And I realized with a creeping horror that they would remain like this forever, or as long as the Ember allowed. I tried to speak again, but the words stuck. My throat felt as though it had been filled with thick smoke. Instead, I lifted the glass in front of me, the bartender's gaze steady on mine. I tilted it slightly, testing, hesitant. No ripple, no sound. Perfect. And then I set it down, trembling. Hours passed, though I could not measure them. The jukebox continued its endless tune, changing subtly, responding to the figures, to me, to the rhythm. I scribbled notes, trying to understand, trying to impose human logic on the impossible. Each patron was a preserved fragment, maintained by the bar's unseen pulse. And I was now part of it. Finally, the bartender spoke again, quietly, almost a whisper. "You may leave when you wish, but know this, leaving changes nothing. Closing time never comes. The bar, the patrons, the drinks, the rhythm, they exist beyond your departure, and someone new will arrive, as you did, always." I left that night with a new understanding, heavy and cold in my chest. The street was empty, the remnants of Ashford hollow silent, but the Ember Bar glowed behind me, alive, waiting. Inside, the missing sipped their unconsumed drinks. The jukebox hummed its eternal melody, and the bartender, patient and precise, waited for the next arrival. I walked away, notebook full, camera filled with shaky footage, heart pounding. I knew I would return, because the bar did not close, because closing time never comes, and because tonight I had joined the ranks of those who were counted, those who watched, those who could never truly leave. The Ember Bar had claimed me, and I understood with every fiber of my being that the rhythm never ended, the drinks never emptied, the patrons never left, and the bar always waited for the next arrival. I had been told it was a temporary assignment, a week, maybe 10 days. Fill in for a carrier who'd gone on leave. Easy work, the supervisor said. Deliver mail to a town that, on paper, was still active. Mountain town, he said. Small population, quiet. Nothing to worry about. I laughed at the idea of nothing to worry about. If anything, I was drawn to small towns, the kind that looked like they had stopped moving decades ago, like they had secrets buried under layers of dust and time. But I hadn't expected what awaited me. I drove up the winding mountain road, the tires crunching over gravel and broken asphalt. The sun was low, orange and fading, spilling over jagged peaks and thick pine forests. Somewhere down the ridge, the fog began to curl through the trees like smoke from a long-dead fire. I glanced at my GPS. The town was marked Ashcroft, population 72. Yet every map and guidebook I had consulted mentioned it only as a memory, a remnant. Still, official records insisted it was active. When I arrived, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the quiet of nature, not the peaceful hush of mountain evening, but the kind of silence that pressed in, heavy and observant. Ashcroft stretched before me in faded gray. Small wooden homes, peeling paint, rusting mailboxes, and a single crooked street lamp that flickered intermittently. A thin wind carried the smell of damp earth and old timber. The post office itself was a tiny building, weathered and squat, with a faded sign swinging from one hinge. Ashcroft Postal Service. The door creaked when I pushed it open, revealing the interior. Dust motes hung in the air, catching the last light of day. The counter was polished but worn, the shelf behind it stacked with envelopes, some yellowed, some fresh. A single bell at the door jingled faintly. I set my bag down and began sorting through the mail. Most of it was addressed in familiar names. The Wilkes family, Mr. Harlan. A Mrs. Klein whose address had long since been removed from every modern directory. I paused, staring at the handwriting. Some letters were decades old, stamped and postmarked but never delivered. Others were typed, pristine, but addressed to people I knew from history books and obituaries. I felt a chill. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Old towns had old mail. Some letters were lost, some addresses abandoned. That made sense. I stacked them carefully, deciding I would deliver what I could. The first house on my route was a gray clapboard cottage at the edge of town. The paint was peeling, the roof sagging, but smoke curled faintly from the chimney. I rang the bell. No response. I stepped onto the porch. The boards creaked beneath my boots. I slipped the letters into the mailbox and knocked on the door again. Still nothing. Then I noticed something odd. The floor inside looked warm, not hot, not like a fire had just burned, but warm in the way a house holds a memory of its occupants. Footprints, faint, pressed into the dust, led toward the kitchen. Someone or something had walked here recently, yet no one answered my knock. I shook my head and moved on. The next houses were similar. Doors closed, windows dark, yet warmth lingered. Faint impressions of life, as if the town remembered its people even if the people were gone. I dropped letters into mailboxes, some of families long dead, some of names I had never heard. A strange pattern began to emerge. The letters always fit the house perfectly. Nothing was rejected. Nothing was misplaced. At the center of the town, a small square with a cracked fountain and dead flowers. I paused. The sun had dipped below the peaks. Shadows stretched long and thin across the cobblestones, and I saw movement, or thought I did. Across the square, at the edge of a shadow, a figure stood watching me. A man, I thought at first, tall, wearing a coat that had seen better days. But when I blinked, he was gone. I called out, a little louder than I intended. Hello. My voice felt swallowed by the mountains, the empty buildings, the dense evening air. No answer. Only the faint hum of a distant river, the whisper of pine needles, and the creak of the fountain's empty basin. I delivered the rest of the mail as quickly as I could. Each house was the same. Signs of presence without any actual occupant. Some chairs were pulled out slightly, as if someone had just been sitting. Newspapers lay open on tables, turned to pages as if recently read. Coffee cups, cold now, sat on counters. And yet, I never saw anyone. I never heard breathing, only me, moving through this ghostly echo of life. By the time I returned to the post office, night had fallen completely. Stars glittered faintly through the clouds, casting silver light over Ashcroft. I locked the mailroom, even though the door offered no real protection. It felt like a courtesy, as if the town watched and allowed it. I scribbled notes in my notebook. Houses warm, footprints present. Mail delivered but recipients unknown. Town active on paper, inactive in body. I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Not by people, not by animals, but by the town itself. Every house, every shadowed corner seemed to hum with awareness, a low vibration in the bones. It was subtle, like static under your skin, easy to dismiss but persistent. I settled into the small back room of the post office, exhausted, my mind racing. I had been a postal carrier before. I had worked in towns that were slow, almost dead. But Ashcroft was different. It wasn't dead. It was paused, suspended, waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to maintain the cycle of delivery. And I realized with a creeping dread that maybe I was meant to be the one. I tried to sleep, but the room felt alive. The mail stacked neatly on the counter seemed to shift slightly when I looked away. The faint scent of wood smoke lingered, though there was no fire. And outside, the silence pressed against the windows, waiting patient, unbroken. Somewhere in the night, I swore I heard the soft creak of a door, a shuffle of footsteps, though I knew the streets were empty. My imagination, I told myself. Old towns did that. They tricked you into believing in movement where there was none. I nodded, tried to convince myself, but the knot in my stomach refused to ease. I remembered the supervisor's words. Quiet, nothing to worry about. And I realized that quiet had its own weight, a presence heavier than any crowd, more attentive than any human. Ashcroft wasn't abandoned. It wasn't sleeping. It was watching. It was waiting. And now I was inside its orbit. I spent the rest of the night organizing letters, cataloging addresses, photographing footprints, noting the warmth and placement of chairs and objects. Everything precise, everything observed. I felt the town's gaze on me constantly, subtle but undeniable. The temperature of a floor, the tilt of a cup, the placement of a letter, each detail mattered. I was not just a visitor. I was now part of the system. When morning finally bled into the sky, I stepped outside, carrying my bag, my notebook, my camera. The streets were empty, quiet, unchanged. Ashcroft appeared as any mountain town would under dawn light, peaceful, unassuming. But I knew it was a mask. Behind the stillness, behind the warmth and empty houses, the town lived in a way I could barely understand, and I was now bound to it, if only temporarily, charged with maintaining its secret, delivering its messages to those who may never receive them. I drove down the winding road, sunlight flickering through the pines, my hands tight on the wheel. The mountains rose and fell, shadows and light moving like slow, deliberate breathing. I told myself it was just a job, temporary, nothing permanent. But I knew, in the hollow beneath my ribs, that some towns never let you go, and Ashcroft, I realized, had already begun its claim. I didn't understand it yet. I couldn't explain why the floors had been warm, the chairs tilted, the mail stacked so deliberately. I only knew that the town remembered its people, even if they had left or died long ago. And for the week I was assigned here, I would deliver their letters, walk their streets, and feel the weight of their absence pressing in from every side. Ashcroft was alive, though it had no heartbeat. It breathed, though it had no lungs. And I had stepped inside its rhythm, the temporary carrier of its memory, the one who would witness what one had seen, the one who would notice the quiet truths in a town forgotten by most, yet preserved in ways I could not yet explain. I had arrived for a temporary assignment, but already I felt the pull of something permanent, something patient, something waiting, and I knew when night fell again, I would return. The morning after my first delivery in Ashcroft, I thought I understood the rhythm of the town. I thought I could treat it like any small mountain village. Quiet streets, friendly or absent residents, old houses holding the memory of life. I was wrong, very wrong. I opened the post office, the wooden door creaking on its hinges, the familiar smell of dust and ink greeting me. I'd gone to the first batch of mail yesterday, placing letters into mailboxes like I've been trained to do 100 times before. But today, the envelopes themselves seemed different. I sorted the stack onto the counter, flipping through names. That's when I noticed it. The postmarks, dates that hadn't happened yet. Tomorrow, the day after, even next week. My hands trembled slightly as I held a letter addressed to Mrs. Klein, 7 Pine Street, postmarked for a day that was still hours away. I opened it cautiously. The handwriting was familiar, ordinary, but the words weren't. Do not leave the house after dusk. Shadows move differently. I'm sorry. I froze, the paper trembling in my fingers. My pulse jumped. I reread it slowly. The date in the corner was tomorrow's date. Tomorrow, not yesterday, not today. Tomorrow. I set the letter down and picked up another one, addressed to Mr. Harlan. Same thing, postmarked tomorrow, typed neatly, formatted like a standard report. But the content was bizarre. The bridge at the creek will fail. Watch the path carefully. Do not trust the lights that hover. They are not your own. I swallowed hard. My stomach clenched. I had no reason to believe this mail was real. Post-dated letters weren't unusual in the world of postal mistakes. But the tone of these letters, warnings, apologies, instructions was too specific, too deliberate. And the addresses, people who had not lived in decades, people who had long been gone. I moved through the stack, sorting, scanning, trembling. Every envelope was the same. Some were warnings. Do not drink from the stream after noon. They are watching. Some were apologies. I cannot keep you safe. I am sorry. Some were reports. The collapse on 3rd Street did not happen yet, but will occur at 2:15 p.m. tomorrow. Do not approach. I felt a growing nausea, a deep, sinking dread. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a prank. Someone in the post office with access to typewriters, printing letters to create the illusion of what? I didn't know. I shook my head, told myself I was imagining things. But the letters kept piling up, and the handwriting, sometimes neat, sometimes hurried, was always correct, accurate, certain. I delivered the first batch as usual, walking slowly through the empty streets. Houses remained silent, windows dark. Chairs were still tilted slightly, as though someone had just risen. The warmth in the floors was faint, but present. I placed letters into mailboxes carefully, glancing over my shoulder. The shadows of the town stretched long and still, following me in ways I couldn't explain. At Mrs. Klein's house, I paused, the envelope postmarked tomorrow in my hand. The door was closed, but the warm glow beneath the curtains hinted at life, or something pretending to be life. I slid the letter into the box, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement behind glass. A figure? A shadow? But when I stepped closer, the room appeared empty. I felt eyes on me, though no one was there. That same static presence I had felt since arriving in Ashcroft pressed in, a low vibration under my skin. My heart pounded. I turned quickly, scanning the street, the trees, the empty square at the center of town. Nothing. Just wind, just shadows, just the echo of footsteps that weren't mine. By midday, I returned to the post office with the remaining letters. I sat at the counter, staring at the stack, my hands trembling. I began reading aloud, softly, to myself, as though hearing the word would make them real, or maybe less real. Do not walk near the old mill. Voices echo from below. They are not mine. Do not answer. The collapse on 5th Street will take place in 3 days. Ensure the letters reach the right hands. I failed to protect them. I will try again tomorrow. Forgive me. Each letter carried a weight that was hard to find. Not fear exactly, not even anticipation. More like inevitability. A feeling that the events predicted were already set in motion, and the town itself was complicit in their unfolding. I left the post office briefly, needing air, needing to escape the oppressive weight of the letters. The mountains were serene in the light of noon, but Ashcroft itself felt different. The streets seemed to lean closer, the shadows longer. I walked slowly, trying to ignore the faint hum that vibrated through the boards beneath my boots. It was subtle, but it was there, a presence embedded in the town's rhythm, like it was listening, recording, waiting. I returned inside, sweating, shaking. I sat at the counter again, pen in hand, notebook open. I had to record everything. The letters, the addresses, the postmarks, the warnings. Accuracy mattered. The town demanded it. And as I wrote, I realized something chilling. The letters were not for me. I was not the recipient. I was the intermediary, the messenger, the witness. The sun began to dip toward the mountains, and I delivered the final letters of the day. A small envelope addressed to no one in particular caught my eye. I opened it on the porch, feeling the chill of evening settle into my bones. Someone new is coming tomorrow. They will see what you have seen. Be ready. I dropped the envelope, my breath shallow, my pulse raced. The handwriting was familiar in a way that made my stomach twist. It was the same style as many of the letters, yet the message felt pointed, directed at me. Someone or something knew I had arrived, knew I was here to deliver, to witness, to observe. That night, in the post office back room, I tried to sleep. I placed my notebook and the letters next to me, under my pillow even, as though keeping them close would protect me. But the warmth in the floors persisted, gentle but insistent. The hum of the building, the subtle creaks and groans of the structure, felt like whispers, not words I could understand, not voices I could identify, just presence, waiting, expecting. I thought of the letters dated tomorrow, events that hadn't happened yet, warnings that were impossible to verify, apologies from the dead, reports of disasters that might never occur, or that already had. In some twisted temporal loop the town existed inside. I couldn't rationalize it. I couldn't dismiss it. I could only record, deliver, and observe. As dawn crept over the mountains, the letters lay on the counter, sorted, ready for their recipients or for their impossibility. I glanced at the first one. The warning about shadows moving differently. A shiver ran down my spine. I couldn't tell if it was the chill of morning or the feeling that some unseen force was confirming its accuracy. I packed my bag, my notebook filled with observations, the letters organized carefully. I knew I had to continue. The town demanded it. Even if the town was no longer truly inhabited by life as I understood it, I had arrived as a temporary substitute, a fill-in postal worker. But Ashcroft had other plans. The letters dated tomorrow were not just warnings. They were invitations, challenges, tests. I walked the empty streets one last time before leaving for the night. Every mailbox held letters that would be delivered tomorrow, and perhaps, only perhaps, the events predicted would unfold. The houses remained warm, the shadows long, and the hum of the town persisted beneath my feet. Ashcroft waited, watched, measured, and I felt it deeply in the hollow of my chest. The weight of the letters, the weight of the town, the weight of inevitability. I had come to deliver mail. But I understood now. Some messages arrive before their time. Some warnings are written by the dead or the absent. Some towns demand their stories be told, even if the living cannot fully comprehend them. And Ashcroft, with its letters dated tomorrow, had just begun. By the third day of my assignment in Ashcroft, I thought I had settled into a rhythm. I had walked the streets, delivered letters to homes that seemed empty but somehow alive, cataloged the odd warmth in the floors, and accepted the subtle, watchful presence of the town. I thought I understood it. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. It started with the Harlan residence, a modest wooden house near the creek, peeling paint, windows clouded with age. I approached with my bag of mail, letters sorted carefully as usual. I rang the bell. Silence. I knocked again. Silence. I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaking under my boots. The air smelled faintly of mildew and something coppery, like old blood, though I saw nothing to suggest it. I slid the first letter into the mailbox. That's when it happened. A rush of wind, or maybe it was more than wind, exploded from the mailbox, slamming the lid shut with a force that rattled my hand. I stumbled back, clutching the bag. The letters inside the box quivered, then shook violently, like they were alive. I barely caught the edge of the next envelope before it slipped out and fell to the ground. I froze, staring at the house. The windows were dark, but the shadows inside seemed to shift. A low hum vibrated in the air, something deep and insistent, pressing against my chest. I took a cautious step back, and the porch board beneath me groaned, almost in warning. My rational mind scrambled for explanations. Animals? Wind? Structural problems? None of it fit. The wind had been still, the air calm. I looked down at the mailbox. The letters inside were now stacked neatly, as if nothing had happened, though the trembling and the noise had been real. My hand still tingled from the impact, and the faint coppery smell lingered. I dropped the remaining letters into my bag and moved on, uneasy. The next house was similar, a narrow white clapboard with a sagging porch. I approached heart-hammering, but determined. I had a route to follow, a job to do. I slid the mail into the box. Almost immediately, a hand, no, something, shot out from inside the slot, gripping the letters, tugging violently. My fingers scraped against rough wood, my knuckles stinging. The envelope slipped from my grasp and fell to the ground. I scrambled backward, gasping. The mailbox slammed itself shut with a metallic clang that echoed through the empty street. I backed away, bag clutched tight, and a thought struck me with icy clarity. The houses were alive. Not alive in the way humans are, not in the warmth of a hearth or the scent of cooking. They were sentient, protective. They were defending whatever or whoever was inside. The shadows in the windows deepened, stretching and twisting as though aware of my intrusion. My pulse raced. I could feel in my ears that low, insistent hum, vibrating to the soles of my boots, up into my legs, into my chest. The town itself seemed to hold its breath. I tried to remind myself that this was temporary, that I had been sent here for a simple job. Deliver mail, record observations, leave. That was all. But the houses made that impossible. They refused, and when they refused, they fought. By the time I reached the third house, I had begun to dread the act of delivery itself. A modest home with peeling green paint. The mailbox leaning at an angle. I approached slowly, careful. I placed the letters against the edge of the slot. As I pushed them in, the box shuddered violently, and a gust of air exploded outward, knocking me backward. I hit the ground, scraping my elbow. The letters I had just inserted scattered across the porch, and I watched, frozen, as they lifted slightly, hovered, then dropped neatly into the box again, as if the house had accepted them on its own terms. I scrambled to my feet, trembling. The street was empty. No one watched from windows. No footsteps echoed behind me. Only the houses, standing silent and patient, and the low vibration under my boots. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum I could not slow. I retreated to the square at the center of town, where the fountain stood dry and cracked. I tried to collect my thoughts, tried to breathe, tried to ground myself in something rational. I had seen the warm floors, the footprints, the letters dated tomorrow. But this was different. The town wasn't just remembering its past. It was defending it, protecting it, and it had noticed me. The next few deliveries were more the same. At each house, some invisible force resisted my touch. Mailboxes slammed themselves, letters snapped back, boards creaked as if warning me away. One house I approached had the door slightly ajar. I thought it was an invitation, until I reached for the mailbox. The door slammed shut behind me with a deafening crack. I spun around. Nothing moved inside, nothing outside, yet I felt a presence behind every surface, every corner, watching, testing me. By late afternoon, my bag was nearly empty, and I had learned something. The houses would accept mail only on their terms. They judged the contents, the rhythm of my approach, my hesitation, my confidence. Any misstep, and they resisted, sometimes violently. Other times, the letters simply disappeared, slipping into the house without my control. I could not force them. I could only offer and hope the house accepted. I sat on a fallen bench in the square, exhausted, notebook open. I scribbled frantically, houses sentient. Mail cannot be delivered without consent. Resistance varies by house. Warm floors, shifted furniture, low hum present. Observation required. Route must be precise. My hand shook. Every word felt like an admission. This was not a normal town. This was not a normal job. The sun dipped low behind the mountains, casting long shadows that twisted and curled over Ashcroft. The hum under my feet grew stronger, resonating through my bones. I knew I would have to finish my route in the dark, and the thought made the hair on my arms rise. The houses would not be less aware in the night. Perhaps they would be more. I returned to the post office briefly, leaving the letters I had not been able to deliver stacked neatly on the counter. I stared at them, the envelopes lined up like rows of silent, accusing eyes. Each one represented a house I had failed to appease, a space I had not yet earned permission to enter. The thought made my chest tight, my stomach knot. I set my bag down and sat heavily. The air inside the post office seemed thicker, heavier, as if the town itself had followed me inside. I could hear faint creaks in the walls, almost like sighs. The letters on the counter shivered slightly, and I felt the familiar coppery scent rise again. My hand instinctively moved to cover my mouth. Hours passed, though I could not track them. I took notes, organized letters, and tried to understand the pattern. Each house was different. Some were passive, almost indifferent. Others were hostile, slamming shut at the slightest touch. The houses seemed to respond not just to the letters themselves, but to me, my hesitations, my confidence, my very presence. Night fell completely, and I ventured out to attempt the final deliveries. The streets were darker than ever, the fog curling around the corners of buildings. Each mailbox I approached tested me. At one, I nearly lost my balance as the lid slammed upward violently, a sharp sound that made me stumble back. At another, letters disappeared into the slot before my hand, even fully released them. Some houses refused entirely, doors closing as I neared, boards creaking in warning. By the end of the night, I returned to the post office with only a fraction of the mail delivered. My muscles ached, my hands were bruised, my chest still tight with tension. I understood something I hadn't before. Ashcroft was alive, not in the way we usually understand life, not with heartbeat or breath, but alive in memory, in will, in intent. Its houses were guardians, protectors, and I had been marked as an intruder, a messenger, a participant. I locked the post office door, though I knew it offered no real protection. The letters refused to be ignored. The town refused to let me leave. I sat in the back room, notebook on my lap, and finally allowed myself to shiver. I had arrived as a substitute postal worker, a temporary fill-in. But Ashcroft was showing me that here, even temporary was permanent. Resistance was part of the rhythm. Compliance was not guaranteed. And I knew, as the night deepened and the mountains held their shadowed silence, that tomorrow, when I walked the streets again, the houses would remember. They would test me again. They would refuse and allow, accept and reject. And I, the messenger, would obey. Because Ashcroft's homes did not forget. They did not forgive. They only waited, and I had entered their watch. I never expected to receive mail for myself in Ashcroft. Not here. Not in a town that existed in all official records, but nowhere in living memory. I had delivered letters to the absent, the dead, the impossible. I had witnessed houses resist me. Letters dated tomorrow. Warnings of events that hadn't yet happened. But nothing prepared me for the one that came back to me. It arrived on the third night of my route. A single envelope placed neatly on the post office counter. I had not delivered it. I had not sorted it. Yet there was, facing me, postmarked 27 years ago. My name, my full name, the one I rarely even use, was written on it in precise, looping handwriting, the ink slightly faded but unmistakably legible. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my hands trembling as I reached forward. The air in the room had thickened, almost viscous, as if the town itself had paused to watch my reaction. I held the envelope up to the flickering light of the overhead lamp. The handwriting was familiar, yet I could not place it. Not someone I knew, not anyone I had ever met. And yet it felt personal, intimate. I hesitated. Rational thought tried to assert itself. Probably a prank. Maybe someone found an old ledger and wrote my name by chance. But I knew better. By now, I had learned the subtle cues of Ashcroft. The warmth in the floor, the low hum beneath my feet, the way shadows seemed to stretch and lean toward me. This letter was not a coincidence. It had been waiting for me. I broke the seal slowly, deliberately, the paper crackling under my fingers. Inside was a single sheet, yellowed at the edges, the handwriting matching the envelope. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my nerves, and read the words aloud. I see you there. You're not supposed to be here. Yet here you are. Do you remember me? You may not. That does not matter. You will understand soon enough. The town is patient, but it watches closely. Return to sender if you wish to survive. Do not ignore the letters. Do not fail to deliver. I froze, my pulse hammering my ears. The words were not a warning in the usual sense. They were a conversation. Someone or something knew I was here, knew what I had seen, and was speaking directly to me. It was impossible. I was alone. The streets were empty. The houses were dark. And yet, here was proof that Ashcroft, in some way I could not yet understand, was aware of me. I placed the letter back on the counter and backed away. My breath came in shallow, sharp bursts. Rationality failed me. Logic had no foothold in a town like this. The Harlan house, the Wilkes family's abandoned home, the Klein residence, they had all resisted delivery. They had all responded to my presence. But this was different. This was personal. I spent hours sitting in the post office, turning the envelope over my hands, examining every crease, every smudge of ink. The air was heavy, humming faintly, as if the town itself had gathered around the building to observe me. I could feel it in the walls, in the floorboards, in the faint vibrations that had become constant companions. Ashcroft had waited for me to receive this letter. It had orchestrated it. By the time dawn began to push the mountains into muted gold, I had convinced myself to leave the envelope unopened. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to return it to sender as instructed, to pretend it had never arrived. But the rest of me, the part that had been studying this town for days, the part that had been marked by its houses, its mailboxes, its warnings, knew that ignoring it would be impossible. Ashcroft did not allow indifference. It required attention, action, and obedience. I stepped outside, the morning chill biting my face, and walked slowly along the main street. The houses, empty as ever, seemed almost expectant. Shadows clung to corners, stretched along walls, as if guiding me back to my route. I carried my bag of mail carefully, but my thoughts were consumed by the envelope on the counter. I could not stop thinking about it. Who had written it? Why was it addressed to me, postmarked decades ago? And what did it mean when it said, "Return to sender if you wish to survive"? As I delivered letters, I noticed subtle changes in the houses. Some that had resisted before were quiet, almost passive. Others, the more obstinate, quivered as I approached, boards creaking like whispered warnings. Every step I took felt measured, watched, recorded. The town was aware not just of my presence, but of my decisions, my hesitations, my fear. It was testing me, calibrating me, shaping me into the messenger it demanded I be. By evening, I returned to the post office with the remaining mail. I could not bring myself to open the letter again. Instead, I placed it carefully in my notebook, under a weight of old envelopes that had been waiting for decades to reach their intended recipients. The hum in the room was stronger now, vibrating through the counter, through the floor, through me. I could not tell if it was a warning or a welcome, perhaps both. I tried to sleep that night, but it was impossible. I lay on the cot in the back room, the envelope on the table beside me, staring at it in the dim light. Shadows shifted in the corners of the room. I could feel the faint warmth of the floors beneath me, the subtle pressure of a presence just outside my perception. I imagined the letter moving, shifting like it was alive. I imagined a hand reaching for me, a whisper curling through the walls. Return to sender. Hours passed. Sleep came in shallow fragments, broken by the sound of my own heartbeat in the low, unrelenting hum that seemed to emanate from the post office itself. I dreamed of the houses, of letters flying through the streets on their own, of shadows that moved faster than any human could. I dreamed of myself, standing in the middle of Ashcroft, holding the envelope, knowing it contained a message that could not be ignored. When morning arrived, I rose reluctantly. The envelope remained where I had left it. I touched it gently, as if testing for life. Its surface was warm to the touch, faintly, unnaturally. I had never felt anything like it. I packed my bag, ready to continue my deliveries, but I knew that the letter would be with me the entire day, a constant weight, a reminder that Ashcroft was not a town to be visited lightly. As I walked the streets, delivering mail to houses that resisted, that accepted, that shifted in response to my presence, I realized something terrifying. This envelope was not just a letter. It was a message in the town itself, or from whatever consciousness had lingered here for decades. It was an introduction, a warning, a test. And by receiving it, I had crossed a line. I was no longer just a temporary mail carrier. I was a participant in whatever cycle Ashcroft maintained. I returned to the post office at dusk, exhausted, and finally opened the envelope again. This time, I read the second page, previously folded inside, hidden beneath the first. You will come to understand. The houses, the mail, the warmth, the shadows, they are not separate. They are extensions of the town's memory, its will, its preservation. And now you are part of it. Do not ignore the instructions, for ignoring is a first step toward becoming lost. Ashcroft does not release those who forget their duty. My stomach turned. I felt the words settle deep in my chest like cold stones. I had always thought of Ashcroft as a town, a place, a location. But this letter revealed it as something more, a consciousness, patient, calculating, all-encompassing. I had been brought here, not by coincidence, but by design. And now that design included me, I sat at the counter, staring at the envelope, my hands trembling. Outside, the streets were empty, the shadows long and silent. I realized with a sinking certainty that my role had changed. I was no longer merely delivering letters. I was being observed, evaluated, assimilated. Every step I took, every envelope I handled, every house I approached was part of a larger ritual, a system I could not fully comprehend. And the envelope, postmarked decades ago, addressed to me personally, was proof. Proof that Ashcroft had always known I would arrive. Proof that it had anticipated my presence, my choices, my compliance. Proof that it was patient and eternal and utterly unyielding. That night, I did not sleep. I sat in the back room of the post office. The envelope before me, my notebook open, I wrote feverishly. Letter addressed to me, postmarked decades ago. Houses resist. Town aware. Cycle unavoidable. Observation required. Compliance mandatory. The words felt inadequate. Meaningless in the face of the truth I was beginning to understand. Ashcroft had claimed me, not with force, not with violence, but with inevitability. And the letter, simple, ordinary in its appearance, was the first acknowledgement of that claim. Return to sender, it said. But I knew, in the deepest part of me, that returning it was impossible. The town had already begun to fold me into its memory, its routine, its unending watch. And I, a temporary postal worker, had become permanent. Ashcroft had sent a letter to me, from the past, from the future, from a place outside my comprehension. And by receiving it, I had crossed a threshold from which there was no turning back. I had arrived for a simple assignment. But now I understood some towns never release you. Some towns do not exist merely for the living. And Ashcroft, patient, silent, aware, had just made sure I would never forget. I had my first letter addressed to myself, and I knew it would not be the last. I always thought the archive would be quiet. That was the point, really. A place for old records, forgotten towns, the kind of files that nobody wanted to see, let alone touch, the kind of reports that smelled of dust and mildew, and the faint tang of paper decaying just enough to make you notice it. That's why I was hired as the night archivist, alone after hours, surrounded by shelves stacked with cardboard boxes and metal cabinets, all labeled with names of towns that had been erased from maps or wiped from memory, towns that existed once and then didn't. The first night I started, I thought it would be routine. Pull a box off the shelf, check its inventory, cross-reference the files with a digital index, maybe listen to the occasional audio recording if it was noted in the catalog. Simple, predictable, safe. I opened the first box labeled Merrill Creek, abandoned 1976. The files inside were brittle, yellow with age, type reports, handwritten notes, occasional photographs of houses that had long since crumbled into the dirt. But at the bottom of the box, neatly labeled in fading marker, were audio cassettes, the kind you had to handle gently, like they might break if you so much as breathed on them. I set one into the old player on the metal table. It whirred and clicked, a faint hiss, then a voice. I don't know how to explain it. The whole town just stopped. The voice was shaky, almost a whisper, as though the speaker feared being overheard. The tape continued. It's like the people vanished, one by one. No one leaves, no one enters. And yet, the lights flicker. Windows open when they shouldn't. And I swear, sometimes I see shadows moving between houses, though I know no one's there. I paused the tape, my chest tightening. That feeling again, the one that hit me every time I read these old reports. The sense that the towns were still alive somehow, that the earth itself remembered them. I'd felt it when handling the papers, a static almost humming beneath my fingers, a vibration through the table. Not all archives have ghosts. Not all towns leave traces like this. Merrill Creek did. And now, in the dark of the archive room, it felt as though the town were listening to me. I pressed play again. The voice continued, speaking in halting sentences about missing residents, lights that appeared and disappeared, sounds of distant machines that hadn't run in decades. Every word sent a shiver down my spine, though it wasn't fear the way most people would describe. It was deeper, a sense of wrongness, of being present in a place that didn't entirely want me there. After the tape ended, I rewound it slowly, listening again to catch details I had missed. The archivist in the recording had mentioned names, specific houses, streets, and even a faint smell of smoke that lingered long after the town had burned, or was supposed to have burned. Smoke, ash, memory. I moved to the next box, Red Veil, 1982. The cassettes here were in slightly better condition. The first tape I played crackled, then revealed a voice recording from a sheriff who had been stationed there. "People talk about the missing trains," he said. "I've walked the tracks at night. I hear them, faint behind the fog. No one else can. And sometimes I think the fog moves on its own, like it's watching me." I paused, the fog moving on its own. I remembered the reports, photographs of streets empty except for the mist curling over the pavement. I imagined walking through it myself. Even in imagination, it was suffocating, claustrophobic, wrong. I shivered, glanced around the empty archive room, and felt a phantom pressure like a hand brushing along the back of my neck. I turned, but nothing was there. I kept cataloging, moving through the towns, listening to their recordings, one after another. The tapes told the same slow, creeping story. Towns abandoned, erased, but not entirely gone. Lights turning on in empty houses. Chairs shifting on their own. Shadows at the edge of vision. And always a sense of being watched. Not by one person, not by a group, but by the town itself. Its streets, its buildings, its very air seemed aware, listening, responding. I found one tape labeled simply Report 7, Black Hollow, 1979. The voice was older, tired, whispering as if speaking too loudly might summon something. I don't know if I'm going crazy. Maybe I am. But last night, I walked past the school. The door opened. A light flickered. I saw figures in the windows, just standing, not moving, not breathing. But they were there. And when I turned to leave, I thought I heard them whisper my name. My stomach turned. I paused the tape and pressed my hand to my chest. Whispered names. Towns that weren't supposed to exist anymore. And yet, here they were, preserved in paper, in tape, in the hum of the archive room itself. It was as if the towns remembered being forgotten. And now I remembered them, too. I cataloged the boxes meticulously, but each tape drew me back into the stories. Each one was longer than it should have been, filled with details that no one outside the town could possibly know. And each one ended the same way. The voice trailing off, a long pause, and then a faint, indistinguishable sound. Footsteps, a door closing, breathing, but never in a pattern that made sense. I took a break, leaning back in the creaky chair, staring at the rows of shelves that stretched to the ceiling. Shadows shifted there too, or maybe it was my imagination. After hours of listening, the voices on the tapes had seeped into my mind. I could almost hear them in the silence between the shelves. I could feel the pulse of towns that no longer existed, as though their histories were etched into the wood, the dust, the very walls of the archive room. I knew I should leave the tapes alone, return them to their boxes, continue cataloging in silence. But I couldn't. Each one demanded attention. Each one wanted to be heard. And the more I listened, the more I realized that the archive was not passive. It didn't just store the past. It interacted with it. It let me into the memories of these erased towns, but only partially. Only enough to make me aware that they were still present. Hours passed. Night deepened around me. The hum of the building became a presence I could not ignore. It pressed against my ears, under my skin, threading through my thoughts. I could feel the ghosts of these towns in every shadow, in every flicker of light. The air smelled faintly of smoke, wood, and something metallic like blood long dried. And I realized with a creeping certainty that listening to these tapes was not without consequence. I had begun to hear things that weren't on the recordings. Faint murmurs whispered behind the walls. The sound of boards creaking as though footsteps were pacing along the shelves. Sometimes I thought I saw movement at the edge of my vision. Flickers, shadows, figures just beyond the edge of recognition. And every time I turned, the room was empty, silent, waiting, watching. By the end of my first night, I had cataloged half a dozen towns and listened to dozens of tapes. My notebook was filled with observations, dates, names, anomalies, but it wasn't enough. I felt their presence in me, in my mind, in my body. I could not leave the room without feeling the pulse of forgotten streets, the lingering warmth of houses long cold, the memory of people who had vanished without a trace. And then, as I prepared to leave, I noticed it. A faint smudge on the wall near the ceiling. A handprint? A shadow? I couldn't tell. It didn't matter. I felt it watching me, not with human intent, not with eyes, but with awareness, as if the towns themselves had taken note of me, had registered my presence, and were now cataloging me in return. I switched off the lights, the hum of the building falling to a low vibration beneath my feet. I gathered my things and walked the door, glancing back at the rows of shelves, the boxes, the tapes that whispered across decades. I felt a shiver of understanding, of dread. These towns were not dead. They were waiting, watching, preserving themselves through anyone who entered the archive room, anyone willing to listen. I left the building that night with a weight in my chest. I carried the knowledge of erased towns, the voices of people long gone, the audio logs that recorded events impossible to verify. I knew I would return tomorrow, compelled to catalog, to listen, to witness, because the archive demanded it, the towns demanded it, and I, a single night archivist, had become part of their memory, a caretaker of their presence, and a participant in the quiet, creeping horror of remembering what should have been forgotten. I stepped outside into the night, the cool air of relief and a warning. Somewhere in the mountains, in the shadows beyond the town, I thought I heard faint footsteps echoing behind me. I turned. Nothing. Just the wind. Just the dark. Just the lingering pulse of towns that refused to die quietly. And I knew I would return. Because once you hear the voices of the erased, you cannot forget them. You cannot leave them behind. They are always listening. I thought I understood the archive after my first night. I thought that by cataloging the audio logs, by noting the dates, the names, the discrepancies between paper and memory, I could keep some distance between myself and the towns themselves. I was wrong. The second night, the reports started appearing, not on the shelves, not in the boxes I had cataloged. They appeared in the folders I had just finished labeling, tucked between older files, in envelopes that were not there the night before. I noticed the first one at 1:17 a.m., when the building was quiet except for the low hum of the air system and the occasional creak of settling floors. A single folder, cream-colored, no label other than a faint typewritten header. Crest Hollow, Report 1983. I did not remember placing it there. I did not remember seeing it in any box. My hand trembled as I picked it up. Inside were pages typed on a typewriter long outdated, each line precise, almost too neat, describing a town that had been officially wiped from maps after a dam collapse in 1975. But according to these reports, the town had continued to operate. Residents filed complaints, letters, incident reports, logs of minor disturbances, names, dates, signatures, each one meticulous, yet impossible. Crest Hollow had not existed for decades, and yet here were their files, as though someone had continued filing after the town vanished. I read through the first report, my pulse rising. A teacher describing children who came to school in the morning and vanished by lunchtime. A postman noting letters that were returned unopened, though the addresses were correct. A sheriff filing nightly logs of noises on the streets. Footsteps, doors opening, faint laughter, but when he checked, the streets were empty. Every detail, every incident, was written as if the town were still functioning, as if the people were still there. I placed the folder on the counter and stared at the wall of shelves. My fingers itched to grab more boxes, more tapes, more reports, but I hesitated. Something about the folder's presence unsettled me. Not fear exactly, not panic, but a quiet, insistent dread. A feeling that by opening it, I was making myself part of the record, part of the town. I picked up another envelope that had appeared nearby. This one was stamped, dated 1991. It was a report from a town called Millridge, officially destroyed by fire during the mid-'80s. The report contained complaints from the citizens about smoke in the streets, maintenance of burned structures, and strange machinery humming beneath the town. machinery that, according to physical records, could not exist. The signature at the bottom was smudged, almost as though someone had used water, but I could still make out the name, and somehow, without knowing why, it felt familiar. I realized then that the towns were communicating through these documents, not in any language I could immediately understand, but through persistence, through filing, through insistence that anyone, remember. I had thought the archives merely preserved records. I had thought the files were inert. But no, the towns themselves, or whatever remained of them, were still active, still aware, still ensuring that someone took notice. Hours passed. I moved between the shelves, cataloging, checking, listening to the faint echoes of the past that the new files carried with them. Each report was longer than it should have been, each description more detailed than the last, and each one ended the same way, an unfinished note, a last line trailing off, sometimes in pencil, sometimes typed. They are still here. I felt the weight of those words settle into my chest. Not a threat, not exactly, but a fact, a certainty. They were still here, and by extension I was here now. My presence, my attention, my cataloging had summoned me into their memory. I could feel the pull in my arms, in my back, in the small hairs on my neck, standing straight as though charged by static. One report in particular caught my attention. From a town called Hallows End, dated 1978. It detailed an event in which the residents reported people appearing at the windows, looking in silently, watching the streets, but never moving, never blinking, never breathing. I shivered. I had cataloged similar descriptions the night before in Merrow Creek, and here it was again in a town that had been declared non-existent. It was almost as though the town shared patterns, instructions, a kind of unspoken coordination. I continued through the night, shuffling between reports, occasionally finding envelopes tucked inside folders I had just labeled. Each one carried the same eerie consistency. Towns that no longer existed physically. Continuing to write. Continued file. Continue to exist in some incorporeal sense. And each one knew I was listening. Knew I was reading. Knew that I was beginning to understand. By 3 a.m., the air in the archive room felt heavier. Not thick in a physical sense, but heavy with awareness. The hum of the lights. The faint vibration through the floor. The way the shadows seemed to lean toward me. It was all heightened. I could feel it pressing against my mind, urging me to look closer, to read faster, to catalog more thoroughly. I had become part of their system, not by choice, but by being present. I found a folder labeled Mill Ridge, supplementary notes, that wasn't in the inventory. The pages were filled with what appeared to be handwritten notes, but the handwriting shifted subtly from line to line. At first, it seemed like multiple writers. Then I realized it wasn't. It was the same person, but something in the script twisted, elongated, as though responding to me, responding to my presence in the room. My hand shook as I ran my fingers over the ink. The words themselves seemed to whisper faintly, not audible, but in the back of my mind. Keep reading. Keep noticing. Do not look away. I realized then that the towns were not just filing reports. They were filing me. Every moment I spent here, every note I took, every observation I made, was being recorded into their memory. I was a component of the very system I was supposed to catalog, a witness and a participant at the same time. And the longer I stayed, the more entangled I became. The reports continued to grow stranger. One from a town called Grayford, officially erased after flooding, described residents who had started filing reports about things that hadn't happened yet, events predicted, accidents anticipated, strange visitors seen at the edges of memory. I had cataloged this pattern before, but here it was written decades earlier in a town that physically no longer existed. Somehow, these towns had learned to preserve anticipation, a kind of record of the unreal, and they had entrusted me to witness it. I glanced at the clock. 5:14 a.m. Almost time to leave. My back ached. My eyes stung from reading. My hands trembled from hours of handling fragile, yellow paper. And yet I could not stop. There was one more envelope that had appeared, tucked behind the box for Redvale. I picked it up. It was heavier than it should have been. Inside were sheets typed on thin, cheap paper, each one describing my own arrival at the archive. as though the town had known I would be here, had prepared for me. Names, dates, even the description of the uniform I wore. Details only I could know. I dropped the papers onto the counter. My pulse raced. A quiet realization washed over me like icy water. The towns had not only filed reports of themselves, they had filed reports of me, and by extension, they were watching, recording, waiting. I was now part of the archive, not just a witness, not just a reader, part of their network. I gathered my things slowly, feeling the weight of unseen eyes in every corner, the hum of the building, the faint vibrations of floorboards, the slight shift in shadows. It all pressed in, reminding me that leaving would not sever the connection. The towns were patient. They were eternal, and I had entered their orbit. As I stepped outside into the dim early morning light, I felt the pull of the archive behind me, through the doors and walls, like an invisible leash. The streets of the surrounding city were empty, silent, but the towns, the erased towns, were filing still. They were sending their reports, marking their presence, ensuring memory. And I knew, deep in my chest, that I would return tonight, because the towns demanded witnesses. And now, whether I wanted to or not, I was theirs. I walked home slowly, carrying the weight of papers that should have been forgotten, of voices that should have been silent. Each step reminded me that memory is a demand, that erasure is impossible when something continues to file back. I did not dare glance over my shoulder, but I knew without doubt that the towns had eyes, and they had begun to catalog me as well. When I returned to the apartment, I set the reports down on my desk, careful not to disturb the order. I stared at the pile. I knew I would sleep fitfully. The voices of towns erased from maps threading through my dreams. Whispered names, incomplete logs, anticipations of events yet to occur, all circling in the dark. And I knew that tonight, when I returned to the archive, more reports would appear, from towns that no longer existed, from voices that had been silent for decades, filing still, watching still, waiting for me, and I would read them, because the archive was not a repository of the past. It was a living memory, and once you enter it, you never leave. The towns were filing back, and I was part of the ledger now. I should have known something was wrong the moment I saw it. The recorder wasn't new. I'd used these old dictation machines for years. Some still had tapes in them. Some were digital now, but this one, tucked into the corner of the archive room, looked decades older. Yellowed plastic, a button panel worn smooth by fingers I would never see. It hadn't been on the inventory. I hadn't touched it, and yet, when I approached it, the small red light at the top flickered on. I didn't remember pressing any buttons. The room was quiet, too quiet. Even the hum of the ventilation felt muffled, like the building itself was holding its breath. Then came the sound. Not music, not static, but a voice. I don't think you understand. I froze. The words were soft, hesitant, but urgent. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the small screen. There was no tape in the slot. No buttons had been pressed. And yet, the machine played. I said Merrill Creek, not Redvale. You misheard. That's not the street name. I shook my head. My pulse pounded. I hadn't spoken aloud. I hadn't said a word since I started cataloging an hour ago. And yet the recorder had heard me, or had heard something else. Something that only I could think. I pressed stop, then eject. Nothing. The machine was empty. No tape, no file, but the voice continued. Now, in multiple tones, overlapping, whispered corrections, explanations, subtle criticisms of my observations, my notes. Crest Hollow didn't file that on Tuesday. That's Thursday. And Millridge, yes, you missed the signature again. Pay attention. I stumbled back. My fingers trembled against the edge of the table. It felt like the air had grown thicker, like something was pressing down, weighty, insistently. The room had always been quiet, yes, but it had never felt aware. Never like it was responding to me, speaking directly to my thoughts. I reached for a notebook and pen, shaking, and began to write what I heard, line by line, word for word. The corrections were meticulous. They repeated names, addresses, dates, things I hadn't noticed, or, in some cases, didn't even remember reading aloud. And yet the recorder knew. I'm not correcting what you wrote. It said next. I'm correcting what you thought. A cold wave ran down my spine. I stepped away, my hand brushing the stacks of folders. Shadows fell differently tonight. They shifted across the shelves in a way that didn't belong to the overhead lights. I could feel them stretching, leaning toward me, observing, and all the while, the recorder played. The hollows were always listed incorrectly. You recorded them as empty, but they were not. The children were in the windows. Did you forget to look? I swallowed. My throat was dry. I hadn't forgotten. Exactly. I'd never been there. I'd only cataloged the reports, the tapes, the files. Yet somehow, the machine knew details I could not possibly know. Details I hadn't even considered aloud. I tried to switch it off, pressed every button, held down the power, pulled the plug. Nothing. The red light blinked on, steady now, and the voice continued. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't screaming, but it was inescapable, persistent. Stop pretending you are an observer. You are participating. You are writing the story. Don't forget your presence matters. I dropped back into the chair, trembling, my hands clenching the notebook. My pulse raced, but I tried to reason with myself. Machines don't speak. Machines don't correct you. I was imagining it. Fatigue. Too many hours cataloging erased towns. Too many voices. Too many names. But the details. The details were too precise. The voice changed then. Softer, slower, almost intimate. Do you remember the fire in Millridge? The children that never left the school? The letters dated yesterday. Written tomorrow? You've cataloged them, yes, but you missed the faces. Did you forget again? I leaned back, staring at the machine. The red light pulsed softly, like a heartbeat. My mind raced. Faces. Letters. The towns weren't just filing themselves. They were alive in some form I couldn't describe. They weren't waiting. They were interacting. And now they had learned me, my patterns, my observations, even my missteps. The recorder clicked and whirred. A new voice joined the first. Louder, sharper. Pay attention. You wrote Hallows End, but you miscounted the residents. They are more than you recorded. Don't forget them again. I gripped the edge of the desk. The whispers overlapped, merged, became a soft, unintelligible hum. I thought I heard my own voice, mixed with the recordings, correcting me, chiding me for what I had written. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't spoken. And yet I was being addressed. My thoughts, my actions, my memory, everything cataloged and analyzed by towns I'd never visited. I looked around the room. The folders were shifting slightly, edges sliding as though something beneath them moved. The shadows were deeper now, pooling where no light should reach, curling along the corners of the ceiling. I could feel the weight of invisible eyes, their gaze focused on me, watching my every move. I tried to leave the archive room. My hand hit the door handle. Locked, not physically. Physically it moved, but I couldn't force my legs to step forward. My body felt rooted to the floor, my spine pressed against an invisible force. And above it all, the recorder continued, correcting, guiding, instructing. You are not alone, it said softly. You never were. You never will be. A metallic click sounded, faint but sharp. A drawer in one of the cabinets had opened, slowly, as if pushed by a breath. I watched frozen. Paper slid halfway out before settling back in place. No wind, no draft, just a movement. And the voice, patient, persistent. You write their stories. It continued. You preserve them. And they preserve you. Your mistakes are noted. Your observations are part of the record. Do not ignore them. I sank to the floor, notebook clutched to my chest. I tried to shut my eyes. Tried to think of something else. Anything else. But the recorder followed me. Inside my head now. Correcting, whispering. Reminding me of details I had never spoken aloud. A house in Merrow Creek, with a faint light in the window. The children of Crest Hollow who didn't exist in any census. The postman in Redvale, who had returned letters addressed to the missing. The machine had become something more than a recorder. It was a witness, a judge, a guardian, and I was trapped in its gaze. Hours passed. I don't know how many. I tried sleeping, but the voice didn't stop. It whispered even when my eyes were closed, correcting, clarifying, reminding. My pen scratched endlessly across the notebook, recording every word, every nuance, every correction. I knew I would not be able to stop. Not tonight. Not ever. By the time dawn approached, the voice slowed, softening, but not stopping. The archive knows you now. The towns know you. You are part of the record. Do not leave before you are noted fully. Do not close your eyes before you are complete. I sat, trembling, my head pressed to the cold floor. The red light blinked softly, pulsing like a heartbeat. And then, just for a moment, the room fell silent. I dared to breathe. I dared to move. I looked at the recorder. Still, dark, the red light gone. I stood, shaking. I gathered the scattered folders. My legs were wobbly, my fingers numb. And yet I knew, in the deepest part of my mind, that the silence would not last. That night, or the next, the recorder would speak again. It always did. It would correct. It would remind. It would ensure the record was perfect. And I, helplessly, inevitably, would obey. I stepped outside into the pre-dawn chill, the early light weakened gray. The world beyond the archive felt impossibly distant, as if I had left it behind hours ago. The towns, the erased towns, the voices on the recorder, they had followed me. Not physically, no, but in memory and presence, in the insistent echo that would not leave my mind. I knew that when I returned tonight, the recorder would already be on, already listening, already correcting, already waiting for me to speak, even silently, so it could whisper back, filing me into the archives it maintained, and ensuring I would never escape the slow, relentless watch of the towns that refuse to disappear, because they are patient, they are meticulous, and now I am part of their record, and the recorder will never turn off. I never imagined I would be writing this final entry, not because the archives would end, never that, but because I've come to understand that the archive itself has a presence, a life, and in that presence, I have realized something I can no longer ignore. I am not cataloging history. I am being cataloged. The night began like any other. I arrived at the building just after midnight, my notebook and pen in hand. The smell of dust and old paper greeted me like an old friend, or maybe an old warning. The archive was quiet, deceptively quiet, too quiet. In my time here, I've learned to notice the wrong quiet, the quiet that watches, that waits. I turned the handle of the outer door and stepped in. The air was thicker than it should have been, humid despite the ventilation. Papers on the shelves shifted slightly as I walked past, though no breeze stirred. The faint hum of the building sounded different tonight, lower, resonant, almost like a heartbeat. I thought I had been alone in these nights before, alone with the reports of towns that no longer existed, towns that filed their own existence into the world, demanding witnesses. But tonight, something felt different. The archive itself was awake. It had waited for me to understand, for me to recognize its voice, its will, and now it had moved. Folders had appeared where none had been before, not tucked neatly on the shelves, not in envelopes on the counter, but stacked on the floor as though laid out intentionally for me to see. I froze. The first folder I picked up was labeled Red Veil, Update 1999. I had cataloged Red Veil before, decades-old reports of abandoned houses and disappearing residents. But this folder contained nothing I had seen before. Names, dates, complaints, all current, all active. And at the bottom of the last page, a note typed in the same font, but somehow urgent, personal. You are here. We see you. I dropped the folder as if it had burned my hands. My pulse raced. The archive, which I thought of as a building, as a repository, was more than that. It was alive in the same way the towns I had cataloged were alive. It listened, it waited, and now it had marked me. I moved cautiously toward the inner stacks, my flashlight cutting thin swaths through the darkness. I had brought the light to help me see, to comfort myself. But I realized too late that the archive did not need me to see. It knew every crevice, every corner, every misplaced paper, and with every step, I could feel its awareness pressing against me, guiding me, keeping me in place. I came upon a shelf I had never noticed before, though I must have passed it countless times. Its edges were worn like the other shelves, but the labels were fresh. Active reports. Do not leave unattended. I leaned closer, peering at the files. The first was for a town called Grayford, officially erased in 1985 after flooding. The report detailed events that had not yet occurred. Not predictions, exactly, but observations, recordings, statements of fact. A family moving through the streets, a stranger appearing at the edge of town, a factory whistle blowing at midnight, and then on the final page, a single line typed as if in deliberate emphasis. The archivist is present. I stumbled back. The person cataloging, recording, witnessing was part of their report. I had been added to the system. The towns, the archive, the files, they were all observing me now. They had waited until I understood enough to recognize their intent. I took a step forward, and the floor creaked. Not the usual settling noise, but a deliberate sound, like a warning. A folder slid halfway off the shelf, stopping just short of the floor. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. The folder opened itself. The pages inside were blank. At first, then lines appeared slowly, as if ink was being drawn by an invisible hand. Names, dates, locations, and at the bottom, a single phrase that made my stomach tighten. Do not leave yet. We are not done with you. I tried to speak, to call out, but no words came. My throat was dry, tight. The air felt heavier now, charged, like the building itself had shifted closer, bent toward me. Shadows pulled in the corners, darker than they should have been, moving subtly, as if they were alive. And then the whispering began. Not the recorder this time, not audio tapes, not the files themselves, but voices, soft, overlapping, indistinct at first, then clearer. Stay. Complete the entry. Document yourself. We see you. We know you. You are here. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound didn't come from the air. It came from inside me, in my head. I realized then that the archive wasn't just observing. It was participating, shaping the experience, making me part of the record, ensuring my attention was absolute. I stumbled toward the main desk, my legs weak, my mind spinning. Reports I had cataloged for weeks now sat on the surface, open as if awaiting my review. But the handwriting on the pages had changed. Not merely the notes I had made, lines I hadn't written, words I hadn't spoken, but thoughts, observations I had only considered privately. They were now transcribed, recorded, preserved. My own consciousness had been integrated into the archive. I sank into the chair, hands gripping the edge of the desk. I wanted to close my eyes. I wanted to run. But I understood this place does not allow departure. It does not tolerate absence. The towns it preserves demand attention. And now, so did the building itself. The folders continued to shift, moving closer to me, stacking themselves, arranging themselves into neat piles. Each pile represented a town, a memory, a life no longer physically present but persistent in record. And somewhere within these pages, my own story was beginning to appear, not fully formed yet, not complete, but present, already noted, already observed, already waiting to be filed permanently. I reached for my notebook, desperate to document what I was experiencing, to create a record separate from the archive itself. But the pen would not move. My fingers twitched, my wrist stiffened, and then the lines began to appear on the pages without me touching the pen. My handwriting, yes, but not mine. My thoughts transcribed, my memories annotated, my presence recorded. I realized then that leaving was impossible. Not because of locks, not because of walls, not because of time, but because the archive had claimed me. The towns, the erased towns, had integrated me into the system. And now, the archive itself, aware, patient, deliberate, was holding me, waiting for me to complete the final entry. I tried to stand, tried to speak, but the building pressed in, heavier than gravity, denser than air. My own heartbeat echoed in my ears, and the shadows moved closer, bending, pulling, waiting. The folders shifted again, and the voices, soft but insistent, filled my mind. You are here. You are observed. You are part of the record. I sank back into the chair, my chest heaving, my eyes scanning the shifting piles, the moving folders, the impossible details appearing on blank pages. My hands trembled, and I understood this is not a record of towns. This is a record of the archivist, of the witness, of the person who thought they were documenting history, but has instead become history itself. The first light of dawn barely touched the windows, gray and weak, almost ashamed of intruding. I knew the building would not release me during daylight. It does not recognize outside time, does not answer the world beyond its walls. It is active, aware, patient, and I am part of its pulse now. I cannot leave. Not truly. Not until the archive itself allows it. I do not know if that will ever happen. I do not know if anyone outside will notice that this building is abandoned while it remains filled, alive, observing. While I remain here, cataloged, filed, watched. The final entry I am writing now is not for me. It is not for posterity. It is for the archive. It is for the towns. It is for the shadows and the voices and the folders that move themselves. I am part of their record. My thoughts, my presence, my mistakes, my observations, they are all filed, indexed, cross-referenced. I hear the creak of shells, the whisper of paper sliding across desks. The archive is alive. The towns are alive within it. And I, helplessly, inevitably, am alive within them. I write this knowing that anyone who might read it later, if anyone ever does, will never understand. They will see the words. They will see the dates. They may even recognize the towns. But they will not understand that the building itself has claimed me, that I am no longer a passive witness. I am an entry. I am a note. I am part of the living archive. And tonight, when the darkness deepens, when the shadows stretch their fingers across the floors, when the files rearrange themselves once again, the building will remind me that I am here, that I am observed, that I am integrated. The archive is abandoned to the outside world, but it is not empty, not ever, and neither am I. I am the archivist, yes, but I am also the archive. And now, location confirmed, I understand that there is no leaving. I am part of the record, always,